So without further ado, take it over, gentlemen. Everybody got it?
Since we have such a small group, I hope it's all right with you that we just kind of have conversations and discussions, and I'm just going to sit here as opposed to standing up, and hopefully it'll help slow me down too, because I have a really bad habit of speaking about 1.5 million miles a minute. So my hope today is to make this a little bit more casual. My name is Curtis Fuller. This is Richard Moreno. We represent the Charter Support Unit today, which is a free service available to new schools. Typically, we only start working with schools once you have a charter school contract. But this year, when we renegotiated our contract with the state, we suggested that we work with schools who are just getting started, like you just had your application approved and you're getting ready to get up and running, because our experience is that most of the time, the leaders that we've worked with tend to put things off a little bit too long and not realize how much work is really involved with opening a new school. So our hope here today, and through the meetings that we're going to hopefully have throughout the year, is to keep you focused on getting the school up and running on time. So that's kind of the point of this new school institute. So the Charter Support Unit is sponsored by a federal grant. It's the same grant that does the CSP grants, which are the startup grants that schools can get, which we'll talk about later today, because that just came open last week in terms of the RFP for those. Basically, the CSU, I already explained this. The idea behind the support unit when it originally started was that most schools that fail, most charter schools that fail within the first 5 years. The chart that's up on the screen shows, of the schools that have failed in Florida, what year of operation were they in when they failed. So you can see that there's a huge drop off around year 6. By the time you get to year 6, you're pretty well established and there's less of a chance of being closed down. But during those initial years is when you really have the most potential of running into problems. So that's why the support unit is here, to help during those initial years and to try to build things up initially. So, I'm supposed to give disclaimers every time I do a presentation. I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice. We probably will talk about a lot of legal stuff, but don't take my word as gospel, because I don't have any authority to give you any legal advice. I also can't be your financial planner, although Richard, I think, is a certified financial planner. We can't serve that role for you within the support unit. We can just give you advice, and then you can take it or leave it as you decide to. So our goal for today is, this is kind of the way we're going to break it down. I'm going to start off with doing introductions for everybody. Then we're going to go through some of the stuff that's in your binder, specifically the new school checklist and some of the planning tools that we've set up for you. Then we're going to talk about corporate stuff, tax stuff, contract negotiations, which if you have a charter application that's approved, you should be getting to soon. Richard's going to talk about facilities. Then we're going to get into marketing, administration, and then finally some accounting stuff. So it's a pretty full agenda. My idea here is to get you aware of the things that you need to know between now and January. And then for those of you who want to continue to meet with us, again, we'll have a meeting in January, and then again in March, and then again in July for the next few months. So that way we every other month are getting together. In May, we won't have a new school institute meeting, but the state puts on a training that you're required to do as a new school opening in August. So that May training will be done by the state instead of as part of this support unit. So myself, my name is Curtis Fuller. As I said, I am a former principal of a charter school in Pinellas County. I was there for about 7 years. Before that, I was a teacher in Wisconsin. My background is education, so I don't get into the finance side of things as much. I work for a company that's called Building Hope. And Building Hope does financing for charter schools and financial work for charter schools. And I'll let Richard talk a little bit more about that. My first involvement with Building Hope was when I was principal. We wanted to buy the building that we were in, so they helped us to do the financing and the bond program for getting that money to do that. And then when I got burnt out as a principal, I asked them if they had anything for me, and so now I do this. And our support unit work came from when I was hired by Building Hope was about the same time that the state had received the federal grant for the CSP grant. So they were going around the state saying that we're going to be doing this free service. We don't know how we're going to do it yet, but we're going to be doing it. So we kind of jumped on the bandwagon and said, well, let us do it for you. And that's how we kind of became the support unit. So I don't have a slide here, but Richard, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay. Richard Moreno. I've been around charter schools now for about 12, 13 years. And then I work, like Curtis says, with Building Hope. And then just a background, Building Hope was started in 2003 out of Washington, D.C. It's a nonprofit private foundation funded by several different sources, predominantly the Sallie Mae Foundation, Walton Family Foundation, some others. And then our purpose is to help grow high quality charter schools. And since inception, we've done about $1.1 billion worth of charter school financing. So we're one of the country's leaders in charter school finance. So, but as part of that, we've learned a lot of lessons with the charter schools. And that's how kind of when I met Curtis back, why I thought there was a huge need to create the support for charter schools, because we go into lend to charter schools and we spend so much time trying to educate them on, if it made sense or not. And the advantage of being a pure nonprofit is we're not driven by transactions. We're not having to close deals. We're not having to do that. So we're able to then guide the schools properly and say, okay, no, you're not going to buy the building now because it's not to your advantage. So, we worked that way through. And that's how we kind of got into the back office support and got into the accounting and those kind of things. So, but I'll leave Curtis to continue here. But this is one of the most important things that is involved with charter schools is looking at how when you start up and making sure these steps are taken properly. Because what ends up happening is you come in with a vision of you have this great idea how to educate kids. That's you see it. You see the light bulb. The eye, you tinkle the eye. This is what you want to do. Your passion for it. But suddenly you're dealing with attorneys on negotiating a contract. You're dealing with realtors on the property. You're dealing with leases, stuff that has nothing to do with education, but has everything to do with running a school. And so that's where I think where this has kind of come from to help the schools and help the individuals address that in an organized fashion, so you can get ahead of it before it gets to be July and August and suddenly you're. So.
All right. So with that, I would like to go around the room so we all can get to know each other a little bit, since we're going to be spending the next 3 hours here sitting together. First of all, I forgot to mention I am recording the conversation, so that way if there's anybody who wants to join the Institute later on, they can go back and get this information. So that's why you see microphones around the room. I turned off the camera since there's nobody online. I figured they don't need to see us. But I just want to give you a heads up that is being recorded. So as we go around, if you could tell me your name, why you are involved, what's your role, why are you in the charter school arena, and are you opening a school or do you support schools, where you are in the process of starting your school, and what will make your school unique, and what you most hope to learn today are kind of the things that I would be most interested in hearing. So we'll just go around.
I'm Melissa Aguilar, and I'm currently a director for multiple charter schools. I've been an assistant principal and a principal at a charter school for 10 years. I've been overseeing 9 charter schools the last 2 years. I've opened up 3 charter schools as principal, and I've helped other schools open up. This will be the first time that I'm opening it up and kind of dealing with the contract negotiations and stuff like that. We're looking at opening up a school that would be servicing mainly the population of migrant students, and we're looking at our hope is to be able to get them to see that there's an agribusiness initiative that they can be a part of, and not just be farmers, but really be a part of the kind of farming that would require engineering and business savviness. So we're pretty excited about that.
Good. Welcome.
My name is Aparna. I'm a teacher right now and at present, and I'm also pursuing my doctorate in instructional technology and distance education.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to actually my main purpose is to get to know the process of building a charter school, which is actually a cyber school that I really am interested in.
Mhm.
And I didn't find much information online for that. So that's why we're here.
I'm Jessica. I'm from a charter operator called Distinctive Schools. We're out of Chicago. We have 5 schools in Chicago. We just opened up one in Minneapolis. We're doing business development in the state of Florida right now, and I'm super, super new to the development side. And so I thought this would be a good way to get my feet wet to learn. I helped open up the school in Minneapolis with recruiting and starting the school. Those last 3 or 4 months, but I know nothing about all of these first initial steps. So just hoping to take away all that good information. So when it comes time to open our school here, probably in fall of 17, I will be ready to help our team.
I'm Marcia Ford. I'm the grants director for the School Board of Polk County. I am working on a district charter compact proposal, and I'm learning a lot. I have been talking to CMOs across the country, and I'm very excited about the potential. So I'm here to learn about what to put in my proposal.
Good morning. My name is Jose Merguido. I'm an educational planner as well as an architect. Designing schools for the last 15 years, charter schools considered. My goal here is to learn how facilities flows into the overall process. We specialize in differentiating curriculum and pedagogy through facilities. So we want to see how we can plug into the process of helping establish facilities.
My name is Carol Sumter, and I'm with Sharp Term Consulting. And what I do, what brought me to charter school arena is I was in Texas for 2 years, and I worked for a charter school network that had been in business for 16 years, but noticed they had no processes, no procedures, and it was like the Wild Wild West. And so what I do is, what my company does is we come in and we set up all your processes and procedures for all of your non-instructional personnel, so that the principal and the curriculum personnel can work on really focusing on the kids and the parents and getting them where they need to be. What happens is a lot of times people don't realize that you need an operational infrastructure until it's broken. And the way that we do it, we set it up in such a way that is you can implement it and grow it, so that once you set up your first school, you can take that model and then go and set up additional schools without having all of the pain over and over and over again. And the goal is to make sure that you stay open in those first initial years that you're in.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Asen, and I'm the school business director for the state of Florida for a company by the name of Charter School Management Corporation. And we provide back office services to charter schools, much like Carol with operational side. We do a lot of the heavy lifting for paying your bills, doing your payroll, creating budgets, going to board meetings. A lot of it, most of it, not all of it, is compliance and transparency in this kind of world that we live in. Previously, I worked for the school district of Palm Beach County for 13 years in the Inspector General's office, so I've seen a lot of things as far as transparency and compliance, and have my background in finance and budgeting.
Good morning. I'm Tasha Kepler, here representing Montessori Winter Haven. We have been approved to move forward to open in August. I personally am a software programmer and a mom. And so here with another board member to learn what we need to do to get this going and make sure it's successful.
All right.
Well, that would be me. My name is Sharon Whittingham. I'm also working with Montessori of Winter Haven. I work as an industrial engineer and a business owner as well. So I think most of why we're here is we don't know what we don't know. I feel like we have a really good handle on getting open in August, but we want to know what are we missing or what don't we know. We're aware of that. So we look forward to seeing what today can bring us.
My name is Napoleon Carroll. I'm with Legacy Academy over in Titusville. We're in the same situation as these people. We've been recently approved, starting up in August. I'm the vice chair of the board, but no educational background. Worked for NASA for 40 years, and we're brand new in this environment, so we're trying to learn everything.
My name is Charlie Munford, board chair for Legacy Academy. And Carol.
Hi.
We talked on the phone.
Yes, you did.
Good to see you in person. We'll talk later. I'm the board chair for Legacy Academy Charter School. As Snap said, we recently approved. I'm not new to the charter school world. I was board chair of the charter school in North Carolina for about 5 years. I have taught high school and middle school. We are a STEAM school, So we're here to learn all that there is to learn and to network with others who've been there, done that, so that we can be successful. Failure, in my mind, is not an option.
You guys have worked with Christy Noe, right? Didn't she help with your application? No? Okay.
No.
I have you
no.
confused with another school then, sorry.
Yeah, I wrote that.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deborah Davis, Secretary and Treasurer to the Legacy, and I'm here on board to be able to learn what I can do to help the school to be a success. That's about it.
Okay, great. And then in back,
Good morning, I'm Kevin Burgess with Charter School Capital. We provide working and growth capital to charter schools throughout the U.S. And I'll let my associate finish up here.
I'm Drew McMahon, and I believe we've spoken on
We
most
have
time.
Drew. We have a commitment. We have a relationship.
Pleasure to meet you in person.
Yes.
Yeah, I work with Kevin Burgess, as Kevin said, helping out with working capital, growth capital, facilities financing, the work. So happy to be here.
thank you.
Well, my name is Leonardo Alejandre. I'm just here really to take a peek on what you guys doing. I like the viewpoints of education. So I'm here with other people in the other rooms, and I'm trying to get the most I can in the area of the charter schools that are not piece of cake.
Well, feel free, all three of you, to come up and join us so you don't feel so back out of this, because I'm trying to have conversations. I rearranged the room when I came in last night because I thought it would be more conducive, so hopefully we don't get yelled at by any of the hotel people. So there's a lot of variety of people in here. I'm going to be talking mostly about school stuff. So those of you who are not from schools, you can apply this how you'd wish, but I'm going to kind of talk to those schools who are opening because that was the intent of this presentation. So about that, in your binders, so I'm using this weird format of my presentation slides here. Anytime you see a link up here, this is a document that's available on our website, and everything on our website is free, so feel free to steal and use it wherever you wish. So the links up here are up on top. Anytime you see something down here on the bottom, this is a webinar that we've done. Part of the support unit is almost every week lately, we've been doing webinars on topics that are important to charter schools. So a lot of times, something that I'm going to be talking about will go a lot more in depth in one of the webinars, and we record all of those. So you can go online and watch them anytime you want. And then if there's something in your binder that we're going to be talking about, there'll be a little circle like this that says what tab it is in your binder. So the new school checklist has all three of those things that apply. I'm going to get that away. All right. Okay. So the checklist is in your binder. It's number 6. What this was is I went to a school up in Madison County a couple years ago, and it was about this time of the year, and the board asked me, okay, now what do we do? And I didn't have anything to give them. So that's where this list started. We started writing down everything that schools need to do once they get approved. So that's where this came from, and it's kind of a work in progress. So it's a Google document online, so that way I can change it whenever I find things that need to be added. It's in your list, in your binder that you can help with, and in a moment I'm going to tell you about a project management system that you can use for free from us if you want to. And all of the tasks that are in this new school checklist are already in your project management system, where you can just load them in, and they'll all show up on your task lists if you wanted to use that. So the way it's organized is you'll see on the first few tables there's some categories, like OR means organization, and FC means facilities, RE means recruitment. And there's a kind of a breakdown of by months when you need to be thinking about things. And then once you get past the tables, there are descriptive paragraph written narratives kind of explaining each one of the things. For example, when I went to that school in Madison County, they were asking me about how they apply for 501c3 status. So we ended up writing some information about how do you go about doing that. And then there's some information in this school, in the checklist for you about how you can do that. So this is something kind of a primer for you. A lot of the stuff that's in here we're going to be going through either today or the next time we meet. So I'm not going to go through it in detail right now, but this is kind of where you can go to look to see where you are in the progress and how how you're doing and if you need to update things. The next thing I wanted to talk about is that project management system that I mentioned. For those of you who are operating schools, can you start a piece of paper with like a list for me? When he sends this around, if you want to write down your name and your email address, I will set you up in the system. Oh, and your school name. I think I have in my black backpack, the one on the right. There's a notebook. Let me open it up here. I think it's tab number 5. It has the link, and you can write down your username and password on there once I set it up for you. But this is what it's going to look like, and I'm just going to kind of show you how it works. If you have a computer with you and you want to go online and keep your task list as I'm talking, when we take a break, I'll sign you up so that way you have an account. Uh-oh, I forgot my password. Let's see. Sorry about this. I store all my passwords in an online thing because I can never remember them all. There we go. So the way this system works is once you get a username, and it'll help if I log into the support unit one and not my own, CSU.org. All right, so once you get your username and password, over here you'll see general support unit resources and you'll see your school listed here. And if you go to your school, the thing that I use in here most often is tasks. So you'll get this overview of things that are happening, and then you can come over to tasks. And right now this school has no tasks set up, so I think I have them in school 1. I'm gonna jump there. These are all of the startup tasks that are on the school startup list that I already preloaded in here. And you can come into these tasks and you can assign them to people. So we can set up users for your entire board and for your school if you'd like. And then when you come in here, you can edit these and change the due dates to when you want to have them done, and you can assign them to other people who are active in your school. And that way you kind of have a task list of everything that needs to be done and deadlines that you can kind of keep on top of things. I don't want to go into too much tech support in terms of how to use this system. It's pretty easy to use. Feel free to play around in there. And if you do run into problems and need to know how to do something, just email me. The system itself is called Feng, F-E-N-G, and it's an open source project management tool. And open source is great because it's usually free. It's just you need somebody technologically advanced enough to be able to install it and run it. So I installed this on our servers for the people who are in the New School Institute to use to try to stay organized. I use this personally. I have another installation of this. Last year we had contracts with 3 different schools to help them with their startup services. So I use this for us to get organized to make sure that we kind of kept on task of all of the things that need to be done. The other thing I really like about it is that it has documents in here as well. So you can upload documents to the Documents tab and everybody would have access to them all. Later on, when we talk a little bit about organizational things in terms of your business, I'm going to recommend Google Apps for Education. And you can put in Google Apps docs in here, and that way everybody can access them real quickly and make changes live online without having to email things back and forth. So using this tool to kind of get yourself organized will be helpful. It's something you just have to go and play with a little bit, and if you have questions, let me know and I can help you with that. So the paper that's coming around, just write down your username or your first name, last name, school, and email address, and I'll set you up during our break so that you can get online. And then if you ever want to have other users, like you want to add all of your board members, if you come into the Support Unit Resources tab and then go to Documents, you'll see that there's a document in here called Request Additional Users. And you just click on that and it'll open up a little form, and then it'll email me when you do this so that I know to go in and add new users for you when you want them.
So this hooks up right to Google Docs?
Yes. I'm a big Google Docs user, so when we get to that part in the presentation, you'll probably pick up on that.
I want to ask about Google Education.
Nope, you can just, it would show up with each school as a different set over here with space. I will have to do that for you because the permissions are kind of funky in there. Yeah, the free version, you don't get projects set up the same way as the paid version, but I don't want to pay $7,000 for it, so I make it work. All right, any questions on that? Okay, please feel free to interrupt me anytime because, like I said, I don't like just talking for several hours. All right, so organizational and corporate considerations. So for those of you who are business owners, that's great because running a charter school is really running a business. Even though you think of it as a school and a nonprofit agency, one of the things Richard likes to say is when you run out of cash, you go out of business. What's that saying?
You're a business until you run out of cash.
Yeah. So you really do need to operate your school like a business, even though it is school focused. A lot of times I'll hear people complain that sometimes governing boards get to be too business focused and not enough education focused. And there is a balance there in terms of what you prioritize in terms of business practices and what you prioritize in terms of school practices. But that is a constant thing that you need to keep in your mind is that you have a budget, you have to stick to it, you need to operate as an effective business in order to stay open. And to be honest, that is where a lot of the charter schools fail, is on the business side of things. Very few of those schools that close actually close because of academic reasons. It's usually because of money or business stuff. So the first thing you need to realize is that charter schools are public schools, which means that you, if you're on the governing board, are a public board. So this slide says, is it sunny yet? Once you sign your charter contract, you become in the sunshine. You have to operate in the sunshine. Until you sign your charter contract, you don't necessarily need to, but I would recommend that you start getting in the habit of doing it because it's a pretty big mind shift once you have to do it. So government in the sunshine basically means that the public has a right to know what's going on at your organization and to be involved in those conversations. All of your meetings have to be posted, and any conversations between board members needs to happen in the sunshine if it's school related. So that means that once you are operating in the sunshine, if you can't have two governing board members just get together over dinner one day to talk about how you're going to hire your principal. That would be illegal. You have to operate in the sunshine. And then you also run into some public records issues, which I'll get to in a minute. This webinar that's listed here on the bottom, we just did this one. We did a two-part series. The first one is the link here, and then on that first one, there's a link to the second one, where an attorney went in depth into what it means to be in the sunshine. And she really went into some very specific situations, like if you do meet an accident out of the sunshine, how do you cure that? So she went into really in depth on those practices. We have another webinar from a couple of years ago that's a bit more surface about the government in the sunshine. That was just, I think, 45 minutes. That's also on our website, but this one was more in depth. Once you sign your contract, you also have 90 days for your board members to undergo training. And I think I'm jumping around because I probably should wait till I get to it on the slide. Yeah, here we go. Once you sign your contract, your governing board members need to do a 4-hour training, and this is in statute. That training has to be conducted by somebody who has been approved by the state to do the training. So I went online, and in tab number 7 in your binder is a list of everybody who's certified to do that training in the state of Florida. So once you get your contract signed, you have 90 days according to state rule to get your board members trained. And anytime you add a new board member, they also have to go through that training. And every 3 years, your board members have to undergo a 2-hour refresher. And if you wait till like 3 years and 2 days, then they have to redo the whole entire 4 hours. So make sure you keep those dates handy. I recommend that you start a spreadsheet and keep a spreadsheet with your board members, their names, contact information, when they were fingerprinted, and when they did their training, so that you can make sure that neither one of those things expire, because they do. There is also a training that I mentioned earlier in May that you're required to send, I think it's at least one board member and your principal if your principal's been hired. And that training is all-day deal where they kind of go through business and operations, legal, sunshine, ESC issues. It's extremely overwhelming, but there's usually a lot of really good information there that you have to take away. And if you don't attend that training, the district cannot let you. The district could prevent you from opening your school because it is statutorily required. They usually offer it in Orlando, Miami, and Tallahassee. So you can choose one of the 3 places. So right of access, I mentioned before, the point of government in the sunshine is that the public should be able to access the information about how your school is operating. And if you are a board member who knowingly violates this rule, you can personally be fined $500 and go to jail for up to 60 days. I don't think that's ever happened, but theoretically it could. I know there are some public school board members who've gotten in trouble and gotten fined over this. I mentioned this to one governing board member, and he said that he could really use a 60-day vacation, so he was fine. I wouldn't recommend that. So I jumped ahead before. All official acts need to be happening in the public once you are in the sunshine. Unilateral communication is okay, and that'll be especially important until you hire a principal, because typically once you have a principal on staff, your principal is the one who communicates with your governing board and like disseminates the agenda and coordinates the meetings. But until you have a principal on staff, your board is going to have to do that. So your governing board chairperson, for example, can write the agenda and send it out to everybody. That's fine. You're not in violation there. When you get in violation is when somebody hits reply all and starts having a conversation about what's on the agenda. So reply all is really bad in terms of government in the sunshine. Don't use it. Advisory committees. This might be helpful to you as you're growing and getting things starting up, as you might want to have a committee that deals with facilities as opposed to your entire board dealing with facilities. If the board assigns the committee a responsibility, it also is in the sunshine. So if the committee is doing work for the board, it also needs to post its meetings, keep minutes, and operate in the sunshine. You cannot use a liaison to circumvent this requirement. So I didn't know about this until like 2 years ago. I thought it was okay for me as a principal or me as a person who's working with the board to go and talk to the board chair, find out what he thinks, and then go to the secretary and say, well, the board thinks this, what do you think? That was a violation. I wasn't supposed to be doing that. You basically, any communication that happens, even if it's through another person behind closed doors, is not okay. Quorum. Your quorum for your meetings must be present in person. And your quorum is defined what's ever in your bylaws. Statutorily, there's not a limit in terms of how many people need to be there for quorum. Your bylaws will say it. If you become a CSP grant recipient, meaning you get that $350,000 from the state or whatever they're offering this year, they have a requirement that more than 50% be set for your quorum. Quorum needs to be in person. You cannot be counted as part of quorum if you're participating electronically. The government and the sunshine laws do allow you to participate electronically in extenuating circumstances if quorum is otherwise met. It does not define what extenuating circumstances is. So if you have 5 board members, 4 of them are there in person and 1 person calls in, that person calling in can still vote so long as everybody in the room can hear that person and that person can hear everybody in the room. So if you have some kind of like an audio system set up like a speakerphone where everybody can hear everybody, you're fine. There was a bill that was circulating last year before whatever branch of the legislature had their temper tantrum that would have given charter school governing boards permission to meet electronically, but it didn't pass. So hopefully it'll come back this year and it will pass because I think it would be helpful, but I don't have any control over that. Another thing that sometimes your governing board say is, we'll just meet in an executive session to deal with this. We have a principal who we don't like and we want to fire, so we're going to meet in executive session to get rid of this person. That is illegal. That particular example is specifically talked about in the Government in the Sunshine Manual. You are not allowed to evaluate your principal or do any PR, HR stuff behind closed doors as a governing board. So my recommendation to boards is the only time in Florida, it's called shade session instead of executive session. My recommendation is the only time you ever consider that is if an attorney tells you to do so, because there are very few exceptions. And when you do have an exception, there's usually an attorney involved. For example, if you are involved in current litigation, somebody suing you, you can meet with your attorney behind closed doors to discuss legal strategy. But you can only do it if there is an actual court case filed, meaning you have a number from the court system saying what your case number is. And when you do it, you need to have a court reporter there who takes a transcript of the meeting, and that transcript becomes public after the lawsuit is over. So only do it if an attorney tells you to. Any questions so far? Yes.
Yeah, for clarity, executive session. Are there any other instances where a board could go into executive session, for instance, to discuss property?
No.
And so there's only one.
The exceptions are attorney-client meetings, collective bargaining discussions, which usually don't apply to charter schools, and meetings involving minors. But I'm not clear on what that means. So my recommendation is you put policies in place so that your board is not dealing with any student issues, so that that never becomes an issue. Yeah. And that kind of gets into an area where I would recommend that everybody has an attorney that you can call, and it's expensive, and I know you don't want to spend money at this point, but it is very important that you have an attorney that you trust who knows charter school regulations, who can help you with these kinds of things when you face them. All right, public records. There's this guy in Florida who makes his living off of suing people for not complying with public records. About a year and a half ago, he sent a request to like some 300 schools asking for their personnel records as a public records request. Personnel records are covered under the public records law. Several schools did not respond. Some of them because it went into their spam box and they didn't know about it. Some of them because they thought that PR or HR records were confidential. And most of the schools that didn't send stuff ended up settling with this person and having to pay a lot of money. So public records is an important thing to be aware of. You should have a policy, and we're not going to talk a whole lot about policies today, but probably in March when we meet, we'll go more in depth into various policies that you should have. But you should probably think about setting a policy with regards to public records in terms of when you get a public records request, how are you going to deal with them? And are you going to charge any money to comply? So you can charge them for like 15 cents a copy, what reasonable rates for pulling it together. And you can also charge them for the time that it takes your employees to pull all of that information together. I have been involved in school startups where public records have become an issue, where management companies were involved and they started there's back and forth between whether or not the management company had the right to say certain things or not say certain things. I have had situations where public records requests were made by schools that hadn't even been opened yet. So it is something that you want to keep in the back of your mind and be aware of. Pretty much everything you do is a public record except for your student records and your emergency plan. Everything else is pretty much a public record.
So on the last one, since board member emails about school issues are public, do you recommend a board member having a school email?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and say that. That's very, very important right now as you get that, make sure all your board members have a separate email address. Because what happens is on that communication, if you do get a request and you have your Gmail account, that's everything. And it's like, how do you don't want to be having to scrutinize everything that you have.
There are tools that you can use that will do that for you. And when we start talking about electronic tools, I'll talk about that again. But yeah, definitely.
And the other thing that I would say on the third bullet also, because a lot of board members have other outside business and sometimes they'll be dealing with each other on the outside business, is to make sure that if they're communicating about outside business, that they don't put it in the same email as the school information, because that information could be pulled into public.
Yeah, the way I always look at it is when you're looking at the front page of the newspaper, just before you hit send, just see how that email looks on the front page. That's the way to look at it.
So the webinar that's listed here is, can they really ask for that? I thought it was a great title for a webinar. It was an attorney who went through public records and how to set policies and what kind of things are legal and that. It was a really good presentation if you want to watch that online. So you are a business. We talked about that. You're a nonprofit corporation. You probably have already submitted your articles of incorporation. Most schools apply for that before they submit their charter application, but it's not legally required. I have been involved with one school where they decided to wait to see if their application was approved first. So now we're going to talk about what tools do you need. Great. So insurance. I should print out a slide for myself with what I'm going to do so I don't jump ahead. Insurance needs. Let's talk about that. At this point, you probably are not thinking about insurance, but as a corporation, you could be sued, and then your governing board is responsible for the decisions it makes. So you may want to look into what's called directors
and officers insurance.
Thank you. Directors and officers insurance. It's usually not very expensive. It's usually only a couple $100. but that protects you as a governing board against the decisions that you make. So if you make a decision that eventually comes back and somebody sues you for, that insurance would protect you as governing board members. So it is not a bad idea to start looking at that now, or once you get your contract signed, so that you have that in place. Most of your other insurances, you don't need to worry about yet. Your facilities insurance, you don't need to worry about until you sign a lease. Your student accident policies, you don't really need to start worrying about until July. Your like general liability insurances, you generally don't need to start worrying about until summertime. So really the only one that you really need to worry about right now is directors and officers. You should have a set of corporate documents available, and some of these you may still be working on probably, but you should have your articles of incorporation. You should have that handy. You may have your bylaws. Most charter districts want to see your bylaws as part of your application, so you probably have at least a draft of those written. And all of your board members should have access to those. Eventually, your bylaws basically define how you operate as a governing board and what would happen if you were to ever close. Those are pretty much the only things you really need to address in your bylaws. I have seen a charter school that had like a 120-page long bylaw document, which was ridiculous. What they had done is they had combined all of their policies and their bylaws together into one document, and it was way too long and way too detailed for bylaws. So bylaws generally are going to be somewhere between like 8 to 16 pages at the most, so that you keep that pretty brief. Policies, the way I define policies when I talk to governing boards, is that your policies are your governing board's direction to your staff about how you want things to operate. And when I first took over as a charter school, I thought it was great because I came from a public school, like a big district. And I thought, since I'm a charter school, everything is flexible, it'll be easy, I don't need to have a lot of stuff in writing. And I quickly learned within the first couple of months that policies were my friend, and I started writing lots of them. And the reason is it protects you as a governing board because you're giving specific directions to your staff on how you want them to do things. But more importantly, it protects your staff when you have angry parents, which you hopefully will never have, but in my case, they happen almost every day. Angry parents coming in and saying, I want this and this for my kid because my kid's an angel, obviously. It helps if you have something in writing saying this is the way we do things. So it's helpful to your staff as well as in terms of your compliance as a governing board overseeing your staff.
Another piece to, like we're talking about staff instructions, sometimes you'll have procedures that are supposed to support the policy. And it's very critical that if you have a procedure that's supporting the policy, that it's not contradictory. Because like you said, if a situation comes up, the first thing they look at is the policy, and then they'll go to the procedure. And if they're in conflict, it doesn't really matter what happened. The school is considered to be at fault because it looks like they don't know.
No, it's also very important because remember when you finish, when the times to do your audits at the end of the year, the auditor is going to go look at all these documents again. Much better to keep them all together there, and they're going to test that. So they're going to say, okay, this is your procedure, and then they'll follow through and say, okay, did you follow your procedure? And if you don't, then you have issues with internal controls. So very important that you have the policies, that you just don't download a policy manual and say, here, I have a policy. And that's not what you're doing.
If you see tab 17 in your binder, I was a little hesitant to put this in here because we're not talking about it today, but I gave it to you so you can start looking at it. The very first page says, do not just adopt these policies, because that's not what they're there for. They're there for you to read and steal and use, but not to just adopt that entire policy manual, because there are things in there that will not apply to your school or may not work for the way you want to operate. But if you need an example of policy on how to do a Family Medical Leave Act, there's one in there that you can steal from. But I would recommend that you not just adopt that entire book. But there are some policies in there if you want to start stealing and using them, that they're there. It's a Word document actually online, but yeah, everything that's in this binder except for some of this, like the red book stuff, is available on our website, and I printed off just so you'd have it handy.
And I think one of the things like just from experience is that sometimes people, when they have multiple schools, they try to do one, and even multiple schools under one governing board, you try to do one set policy manual that would be kind of all the schools. And you have to be careful because the schools have different needs, different clientele, and you can't expect it to necessarily include that. So
Yep. And the most important thing is once you set policies, you need to make sure that they're followed and not just something that you have on paper and are on paper. But once you start adopting policies, that's something that your governing board shall have copies of and should have access to. I recommend also with regards to policies that you have some organizational structure to how you're adopting them and keeping them together. I have seen a lot of the schools where the board will adopt a policy, but they don't have like a manual or a book or something that the policies go into. And so they adopt it and then everybody kind of just forgets about it. And you have to like go back and look at minutes in order to find it, which is very ineffective. So the policy manual that's in the, as a sample in the binder is set up where section 1 is all vision and mission stuff. Section 2 is all governing board stuff. Section 3 is all employee handbook stuff. So that way there's a structure that when you adopt a new policy, it goes into that structure and then you have it all in one spot. That's something that I really advocate for. Some people don't listen to me, but I think it's helpful. The other thing that your governing board should all have copies of once you have it is your charter contract. And I'm going to talk more about that later, so I'm not going to go into that now. And a copy of your annual budget. Those are 5 documents that, in my opinion, are essential that every board member have a copy of. So there's a couple important resources that you should be aware of. The Florida statutes, there's a link here. In your binder, I think it's number 8, I printed off, we put together a booklet of all of the, not all of the, but many of the important statutes that charter schools should be aware of. And unfortunately, it's like 90 pages long, really small print, double columns. But like the Florida statute for charter schools is 1002.33. It's really long, but you should read it and understand it. There's the policies in there regarding financial emergencies. We put the laws in there about teacher employment evaluations because they apply to charter schools. So the laws that most commonly deal with charter schools are in that manual for you if you wanted to. I personally never use a paper version of the statutes because I like using Control F to find things and jump around quickly. But there are districts and there are attorneys who will tell you that you should have a paper printed out copy to refer to and highlight and mark up. So if you're the kind of person who likes dead trees, there's one in the binder for you. Another important thing that you should have that's not in your handbook because it's like 400 pages long is the Government in the Sunshine Manual. I find that extremely difficult to read, but if you have questions, again, Control F is really helpful to find certain situations. I went to a governing board meeting one time. I was supposed to do a governing presentation about how to be a more effective board. And I got there and they asked me to go sit in my car because they wanted to do their principal evaluation in private before they met with me. I'm like, you're not allowed to do that. And she said, well, that's why we were doing it. So while I was sitting out my car, Control F, I found the specific example in the Sunshine Manual, and I gave it to her before I left. The other important website that you should know is the DOE School Choice, and I actually think it's on your things when you register. That's an important website to go to because that's where the state is going to put a lot of their information. So like the CSP grants, when those RFPs come out and they have professional development training stuff up there. I personally find their website kind of difficult to navigate. And every time I go, I have to relearn how to find the stuff on there. But it is an important site to know at least where to go to find it, like your revenue estimator and your capital outlay amounts and all that kind of stuff is all on there. So this is where I was going to talk about online tools. As a business, you want to start thinking about how you're going to operate as a business. I did a couple years ago a pre-session for 3 hours just on how I operated all of my online stuff as a principal. So this is something that's kind of 2 computers in front of me, important to me. First of all, I think you need to develop some kind of an email system that you're going to be using for your school. Corporations tend to use Microsoft products, and when I was a principal, we used Microsoft Office and we had an Exchange server on site, and we had to pay probably I think $4,000 or $5,000 to get the Exchange server, and then it was not something that I could keep track of myself, so I had to hire a tech person to come and help us with maintaining that, and I didn't like it. So we switched to Google, and ever since I have been a huge Google Apps for Education advocate because it's free and it's pretty easy to use. Now Microsoft is offering free accounts for schools, but it is a limited. It's not like where you can get like Microsoft Word and Excel and everything downloaded on your computer for free, but you can use the online tools for free through as a school. I've not personally gone through and registered and done that entire process, but it is available if you prefer Microsoft products that you could sign up for it that way. The Google Apps for Education is a free service. You just Google Google Apps for Education or GAFE, and there's a sign-up sheet. You just need to put in your domain that you want to use. And then it used to be that it took like 8 weeks to get approval, but the last time I did it, it took like 2 days. So it's a really quick approval process to get set up. You can do it without a whole lot of technical expertise. I have helped through the support unit. I have helped other schools set up their Google Apps for Education account as part of our consulting services that we do for free through the support unit. So if you do run into problems and you wanted to set that up, please let me know. I can help. But the reason I like Google Apps for Education is because you get Gmail with your own email address. So like whatever your school name is at your school, whatever domain you own, you can set up as many accounts as you want for teachers and for students eventually once you get students. You have the online productivity suite. So like we have Microsoft Word, but online you could use Google Docs. And the thing I really like about Google Docs, especially for where you are, is that it's collaborative. You never have to email stuff back and forth. You just share the document. And as people are making changes, you can see letter for letter as they type. And you can go in at any time and see the changes that have been made. So as a governing board, as you're working on things and trying to develop all the stuff, it's a pretty easy place to go and work online without having to worry about back and forth. The other thing I like about Google Apps is they now offer for free, it used to be $5 per person, but now it's free, their Vault service, which is an email archival system. So every email that comes into your domain is stored in the Vault, and you can go in and search. So if you get a public records request for everything related to the property that you're looking at buying, you can search for the property name or the street name or whatever, and every email sent to any member of your domain will automatically come up so that you can easily comply with public records requests. It's important that, especially once you start hiring people, that you remind them that they should have absolutely no expectation of privacy, because you can go and read any of their emails using Vault. But most people should realize that their employers pretty much have that right now anyway. But if you use Microsoft Office, I don't believe there is an archival system built in unless they've added it since the last time I looked. So you'll want to look at buying an archival system that you can use on top of that. I know Barracuda offers some. That's the only one I've ever looked at, but it was really expensive. I think it was like $2,000 or $3,000. So whatever system you do use, make sure you find an archival system. Most attorneys will tell you that you need to have one in order to comply with public records laws. Questions on that?
Is there any sort of like time requirement as far as just the last 5 years, 10 years, or it's all when it comes to public records?
There is somewhere in statute, and I don't remember where, a list of timelines for how long you're supposed to keep things, and it varies between 5 to 7 to 10 years, depending on the types of documents. I think Vault is a 10-year storage. You can store it up to 10 years, so I would just set it to 10 and leave it there.
Okay, and is there any like storage limitations with the Google
Vault?
With the Vault or with the Google Apps for Education as far as?
I think 100 gigabytes per user.
Okay. And does it work with forms as well?
Yes.
The Google Forms? Okay.
Yeah, I use that a lot.
Yeah.
But don't you have to pay once you've used a certain amount of space?
If you go over that 100 gigabytes per user, you can buy extra space for users.
And usually space.
I think I'm one of the only people I know of who've ever gone above 100 gigabytes.
No, that's why
well, I mean, and that's also why, as far as, I mean, if everything is public and we need to store everything, I mean, I still like the idea of having everything cloud-based because it then minimizes any on-site database backup systems that we need. But if it's, yeah, you can easily use 100 gigs depending on what you're storing.
I have 1 terabyte, I think I have, and I pay, I think $9 a month.
Yeah, and I don't think storage is that expensive anymore, especially if there's something like that. But
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Some of the other tools that I really like that I wanted to mention are Dropbox. The negative side about sharing things in Google Apps is that you need a Google account to access it. So like I can share a PDF file with you and send you the Google link, but usually it'll ask you to log in as a Google account in order to open it. And some people don't like that or don't have a Google account. Dropbox tends to be a little bit easier to download and share files. So that's, I think, what Richard uses more prominently. That's an important tool to probably get used to using and looking at. Evernote, I think, is also a very important tool that as somebody working to start a school, you should get used to using. their tagline is they want to be your external brain. So anything that you do, you put into Evernote, and then you can search for stuff later on and find it whenever you want. And they have an app for every single platform I've ever seen. So you have it on your phone and on your computer and on your tablet. And when you go to meetings like this, you could take a picture of whatever's on the screen. It becomes searchable. So if like this was up there and then I searched for the word document, this screen, even though I just took a picture of it and didn't type it in, it'll be found during that search. So I use Evernote to keep track of any meetings that I'm at. I open a new note and keep my notes for that meeting in there so that I always have my meeting notes handy. I keep it for when I do computer programming, so I keep all my programming notes in there. When I go to conferences, I get home and I scan all of the handouts and then I throw them in the trash, but then they're in Evernote, so I have them if I ever need them. I use it to, anything I need to remember long-term, I put in Evernote. Boomerang is a service, it's not free, and I usually like free, but this one is worth paying for in my opinion. It ties to your Google account, and I think they have an app for tying to your Outlook account as well. And what it does is allows an email to be boomeranged back to your inbox at some point in the future. So if I send an email to somebody, I can mark it off saying, boomerang this to me in 2 days if I don't hear back. And then if nobody replies to that email in 2 days, it shows up in my inbox again so that I remember I still need to deal with it. Or if it's something you don't want to deal with right now, you can say, just take it off of my inbox and then get back to me in 5 days. And then it pops up again in 5 days so that I remember I need to deal with it. It also lets you send emails in the future. So if you don't want this email to be sent till tomorrow for some reason, you can tell it, don't send this until tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And then that's when it'll send it. For me, trying to stay on top of a lot of different vendors or different clients that I work with, it's very helpful because I'll forget after I hit reply, it's out of my head and I won't remember unless it comes back into my inbox. So I really like that service. Tools that anybody would recommend that they think are important for using?
Do you find it confusing at all to have multiple tools as far as like this goes? Like my concern is I'm trying to find as few as possible so that we have one place that we know. Like I like the idea of FANG, especially for like the startup year for project management. But we were definitely looking into like the Google Apps for Education because it does have so many things in there. Or do you just
you kind of need to develop a workflow on your own for how you can work best. For me, Evernote is stuff for myself. I don't do any sharing in Evernote. It's my information that I need to remember. And most of my Google stuff is stuff I share or stuff that I'm doing with clients. So I develop a system that works for me, and I guess that's kind of what everybody would need to do.
And it's also depending, like for me, that I'm always on different devices. And that's where it became with Dropbox and the Google made it super easy, because in our corporate office, everything is the old style. We have, the Exchange server, we have the server at the office, we have all that. And I just, can't deal with it. So that's how it becomes is what's easier for you on that side of it. But luckily there's the advantage to be able to do that. But having that one source to be able to go where it's not machine dependent, very important.
Right.
Because when you lose a hard drive, which has happened a bunch of times, more than I care,
Absolutely.
it's where you have it and you can start off immediately.
I love Dropbox because I didn't have an app on my phone. So if I'm anywhere and somebody asks me a question, I can literally open up my Dropbox app and I can see any document, and from my phone I can email it to them and stuff. So it's really useful.
You can do the same thing with Google Drive now. They have a really nice app for the same thing.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a few more slides and we'll be coming up to a natural point for a break in a few minutes. Next thing I want to recommend is that you develop a system for everything. And again, when I was a first-time principal, it seemed kind of strange to me. But now when I do something, I'll take more time the first time I do it to figure out a way that's effective and that'll be easy to reproduce. And I'll take more time the first time I do it so that system is in place later on to make life easier. Literally everything you should have a system for how you run your meetings, to how you store your files on your computer, to how you hire somebody, to how you deal with students when they come into your school, how you're accepting student applications. Develop systems for all of that so that you have a process in place. So these are just two of the things I wanted to mention. File storage. A lot of the schools that I work with, they just start throwing everything into a single folder and it's almost impossible to find stuff later on. You are going to have a lot of documents running a school. It's going to be overwhelming. So start now trying to think of how you're going to organize. If you're a dead tree kind of person and you want to use a file system, fine. Make sure you have a system set up. You actually need to have a fireproof file cabinet in your school anyway. So, however you want to handle that. I recommend that you think about like a folder structure on your computer and that you put everything online in your computer's file storage, whether it be a Dropbox or a Google Drive. And what I usually do is like for the clients that I work with that are schools, I'll set up a common structure for every school that I work with. So I'll have a folder for every school year, and then I'll have a folder that's called grants, and all the grant stuff goes in there. I'll have a folder called governing board, and then in the board folder, there's another folder called minutes and another folder called agendas. And everything that I date using year, month, day, because then if you sort them alphabetically, they'll show up in chronological order, where if you use month, day, year, they show up all of your January stuff first and then all of your February stuff. So I've developed a system that works for me, and if you ever see anything that I ever save, you'll notice that this is the way I save them. But that way you have a kind of history of things going back as well. It seems like such a minor little thing, but there's a school that I'm working with in Miami right now that they inherited my file system. I had it all set up and it was nice and I could find stuff. And now they've been running a school since August. And I go into that folder because they're using my Google Drive folder as their primary folder for running stuff. I can't find anything. There's like 300 documents in the main root folder and it just drives me crazy. The other thing that I would recommend is that you start developing a system for how you're going to operate your governing board meetings. I mentioned that you're not required to be in the sunshine until you have a contract, but it's probably a good idea to start getting used to it now. So I'm just going to tell you some tips that I use when I do the governing board presentations. So this is an example of minutes for a school that I was working with. You'll see that there's the opening session where you kind of do the agenda. Then there's the reports section where, like, if you have a principal, the principal would report, or if you have a committee that's working on finding your facility, they would do a report on where they are. I recommend that you consider using a consent agenda. At this point, it's going to seem kind of silly because you're not going to have a whole lot of stuff that's going to be consent. But what a consent agenda is stuff that's routine that you need the board to officially approve, but you don't necessarily need to talk a whole lot about. For example, approving last month's minutes, or if you have a copy machine contract that's already in the budget and the board just needs to approve it, you could put that all under consent agenda. When you approve your agenda, you approve everything on the consent agenda in one lump. So that way you don't even need to discuss all of those things. You just say, yes, we approve all of these things. If there's something that a governing board member wants to question, when you come to the point where you're talking about your agenda, you just say move item C down to new business instead of consent. And that way then it becomes something that you're going to talk about. And that way everything on the consent agenda is just done and you don't have to spend a whole lot of time. I was at a board meeting on Friday actually, where the board chair literally read the board meeting minutes to the board before they approved them. And that's not gonna work. Then you have your discussion items and things that you actually need to talk about. Then this is an example of another format that I've used in the past for a board minute or a board agenda. This school had a hard time keeping things on time. So we started trying to set some time limits on agenda items. If you're a board that tends to meet for 3 hours at a time, at this point, it's really a lot of work for you as a board, but you should try to get to the point where you get your meetings like about an hour, hour and a half, so that you can run through things. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to find more board members. So setting time limits is a way that you can kind of keep yourself on track. And if you go over that time limit, then you table it until the next meeting and spend more time on it then. Then the next thing that I do with the schools I work for is I actually take that agenda and I copy and paste it into a new document, and that becomes my minute. That will then become my minutes. So what I do is I copy paste it, and I change all of the text to gray and make it small. And then I go use the agenda as the format for using the minutes as well. So I'll just, after that line, hit enter, start typing in the minutes, and that way it's kind of tied to the agenda real quick as well. So that's the system that I've developed that works for me. And the way I do it is stuff that is action, like action items, motions that were made, I put in bold, and stuff that is conversation is not in bold. So that way it's quick to see what decisions were actually made. When you're doing your minutes, it's important to remember your minutes should not be a transcript. So you should not be taking word for word what your board is talking about. I have seen a lot of charter schools where they do try to keep things word for word, and while it's entertaining to go back and read some of the personal conflicts that happen at those schools, it's not a good idea to put that all on record. So just basically summarize the conversation so that if somebody coming up back later on, picks up the minutes to try to get the gist of the way your conversation went. That's the point of the minutes. And any action item needs to be very clearly put out. And then I recommend that you put in a process for how your agendas will be shared and timelines. So the way I usually work and what I recommend to boards is like maybe about 10 days before your board meeting, somebody circulates a draft agenda and says, this is what we have for our next meeting. Is there anything else that you need on the agenda? And that way you have some time to add things. About 3 to 7 days, depending on how organized you are, I recommend sending out a packet of everything that you're going to talk about at that meeting. So if you have a contract that you're going to need to talk about at the next meeting, send that contract out to all of the board members so they have a chance to read it before the board meeting. If you have board minutes from the last meeting, send those out so that everybody has a chance to glance at them before the meeting actually starts, because you don't want to be like that meeting I was at on Friday where they're actually reading it out loud during the meeting. Realistically, a lot of board members don't actually read that stuff when you send it out. So you kind of need to develop a culture amongst your board where they realize we're not going to be spending time on this stuff because you were supposed to do it beforehand, and develop that culture so that you can get your board operating effectively. If you have a hard time staying focused, use a timekeeper. The other thing that a lot of schools will do is like they'll have a board member who's secretary and they'll keep the minutes. And then like right before the next board meeting, they're scrambling, trying to finish the minutes and put them together and send them out to the board for approval. It's really hard if you're not meeting, like if you don't meet for 4 weeks, it's really hard to remember a conversation that you had 4 weeks ago. And if you're anything like me, trying to keep chicken scratch and what you were talking about, it's not going to be legible for you 4 weeks from now. So I recommend that you put in a time limit for how long after the meeting you want your minutes done, so that your board sets an expectation for whoever's keeping those minutes to make sure that they're done on time. All right, do we need a break? Okay. Let's take 5 minutes and then we'll come back and talk about tax exempt. I brought donuts for those of you who came in late. Please eat them. They're to help keep you awake. And I don't know what I do with all of them. Where's that list of people I was supposed to sign up? Thank you.
Yeah, we weren't on the list. I think it's
That's fine.
Hello.
You wrote your name on here, right?
Sorry.
So-
No, you're fine. Well, that's quite all right. I like to get some situation.
How are you?
Nice to meet you. Granted, I never worked on projects. I've reviewed for
So hopefully it all kind of should get the cause.
Okay.
Really fun.
Well, there's 2 founders of my company, and one of them works with our company for the other operations that he runs. And one of them is a group called Acceleration Academies, and they have dropout centers.
Oh,
So
okay.
they work with
I know the name.
dropouts. So, and they're like really big in you know, I don't know. I'm not familiar with it all. I just know that they are doing quite a bit of work there. And they have a couple of their academies. So Joey Wise.
I am, yes.
He's also one of the founders of my company. So he's here right now.
Marcia, did you want an accountant thing?
And then we tailor the package to that, and then we give you a package price. And one of the things that is a package, we
The one that I most regret not having is the Gantt charts. Gantt charts. If you've ever done construction work, you've probably seen where they like draw out boxes of how long things are going to take. That's the one thing it doesn't do that I really wish it did. It also has client management and project management a bit more in depth in the paid version, but I haven't ever felt that it needed those. Did you want an accounting project management system?
No, I want to understand what is, when I went out.
Okay, what I'll do then is I'll set you up with
So I
school
might go
one.
in and play with it. That's.
Okay, so I have testing school, like the school one, it was just a test playground. I'll sign you up for that one, so you just.
That works, that works. This is really good for me because I can see what it is.
What are all the
There's a lot of stuff like.
and then what we do on the outside is we say,
I think we don't think about it.
Yeah.
plan 3 months. So you go
I'm trying to think.
Thank you very much.
We send our cases on, so when we think about it, we feel like, oh my God, I need this done.
And then it becomes, it's not something that teachers and principals have to deal with. It is just a distraction. You know, like something as simple as your vision and your hearing that you need to have first month. So plan that out before the end of the school year. So everybody knows when it's gonna happen, how many kids you're gonna have, it's gonna be a challenge, what classes are gonna be. Otherwise, you get into the school year, you're like, oh, I can't do September, oh, testing is coming here, oh, I can't do that. And then all of a sudden, kids can't see, and you don't find out until the school.
I think for us, the implementation part isn't a concern. Like I said, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. You know, like we've done a lot of reading, a lot of research, but a couple of things that also might creep up.
And something as simple as when you have a brand new school, everybody's new, right? You don't really realize that everybody's new.
Right.
No, how much is this team moved up? Like, who do I go to primary? Who do I go to secondary? Who's the responsible? You know, like on the finance on the backside of how much they can up to. But how do you get money as a parent into and then you know, that piece right there is I come from business and it's like it's a nightmare because it's so prevalent. Right. And how do you train somebody if you're having an event? The kids are taking tickets. How do you monitor that? So those are kind of things that'll get you on the news.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point yet with how do we take money.
Yeah, but it's something that you don't think about because your focus is on
Florida is where we're. Yeah, we really know. Which is interesting, this whole conversation. Yeah. It's so far, it's only been the three of us that have been recording, which I guess we were on, you know, the articles, we are the official board. Now there's all people coming out of the leaves. Have to make to pick the right people.
Do you guys have like a policy around how you
we have an application to send out to potential board members, which we just received back. So we don't have a written policy on it. We don't. We don't.
Yeah. So let me find out from the school that I'm in Texas if they have a written policy, if you find somebody here.
Because that was one thing I wanted to find out. How do we actually?
Yeah.
We have
right now, they want to be able to present themselves as members of the board, to help us with this, but we want to make sure we're doing this right. Right. And then you make it so like the board that I was on was very much nonprofit and academic. And I'm like, oh, guys, so in the business world.
Yeah, we've got the business. I think we're missing the academic.
We're actually,
we have one high school teacher.
Yeah, and that is really critical.
Yeah.
But what we also need is we're specialists in this, and we want to implement this specific curriculum. That's where we get right. But unfortunately, like we might end up having to find there's some other stories. Right. To get that, I'm also because I don't have business and I'm not an educator. I'm focusing on trying to be that I don't want to say expert, but at least knowledgeable to help with that.
It's interesting. I wonder if he would have a written policy too.
Yeah.
That's the one biggest thing I want to get big. I guess it's just on our forefront.
Yeah, probably in the statutes. I know like the school that I was helping, I was actually on the board. That's how I ended up getting into all this stuff. And we had a board member that after meeting I was working with him. I said, hey, that voting at that board member was kind of weird. He said, it's all football. And I was like, sure, that's what you guys. Yeah. And it's probably the way that you set it up. It's a statute.
Right, it's, we have to.
Your process, it's not like the statute's gonna tell you how to do it.
Right.
You set up how you're gonna do it, and you have to follow.
Right, and that's the problem with the statute says. I'm interested.
Right now, we've got 3 people.
Mr. Carroll.
Hi.
want to make sure.
The bylaws should have but there's nothing that you can restrict for.
Well, I'm not here on Tuesday, but I only took rules for how to do it. I just went back to September. This is how I'm going to decide.
If it's not in your bylaws, you can mention the policy. Like some bylaws that agree to have a rule about organization, non-basic policy, which has realistically, committee or process. One of the things, I'm actually going to talk about it.
You know, I had this, you know, I know you were busy, and I said.
Number 16. There's a sample board member application.
We've done the application. We've got various sources. Now I guess we're thinking, how do we officially? That's the problem.
So here's a list of skills that I So at this point, it's pretty much a this one. We are a corporation, so you're operating.
We are starting.
So we need to keep our board agile. So we really need to get officially, you're supposed to.
Yeah.
That costs money.
Well, you can just.
You have to pay.
Yeah.
But like so if you get a board list that's different from Sundays,
That's pretty strong.
You can also do a DBA, but
We've done a DBA. We did a DBA first. There's another private school. There's a lot of stuff. So we're getting but I know. So anyway, okay, yeah. Thanks. What? Like after they did I don't know.
Yeah, sure, horrible. Okay.
No, I'm fine.
I just needed to let you talk.
No, I ran into.
So, I mean, I wanted to kind of get at it, we don't know that governing boards, do you want to be on the advisory board? Would you
tracking down this
But,
way.
but the thing is that.
We're gonna get started again in about a minute.
Yeah, I mean, we gotta be honest with ourselves. I don't want to invite unless we play the card of if he's not on there, just usually like essentially in the hopes of him saying no kind of thing, you know, like would that be on? That's food for thought.
I didn't get to only one person on the sign up list because it is a slower process than I thought. So I'll keep working on this.
Did you get to number one?
I did. You were the only person I signed up for.
That works for me.
To those of you who are not with a specific school, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in school 1, which was like my little playground test school. And if you have a school that you're working with, for example, your name, I don't remember, Melissa. If you have specific schools you want me to set up in there, just let me know. But for now, I'm just going to put you in as school 1 in the test school. I think we're missing 2 people, but they'll join us. All right, so next thing I wanted, any questions before we keep going about stuff we've talked about so far?
Could I just ask a very silly question?
No, there's no such
I know,
thing.
I'm clear that once we sign a contract, sunshine, everything. Now, anything prior to the sunshine, should we really worry about? I mean, we've had board meetings and we've.
The attorneys I've talked to have said, no, you don't need to worry about it. But I will say I was just at a school last week where the district was coming back and telling them they were not in compliance because they were meeting in somebody's house, but it was before the contract was signed.
Because we meet as a board,
Mhm.
but we have not signed a contract. So you're saying, worry about it?
I would try to get into the habit of doing things in the public. The hard part is you don't have a facility, I'm guessing. I didn't mention this when we were talking about government in the sunshine, but when you meet, you can't meet in somebody's house and you can't meet in a place where people would feel uncomfortable going. That would be considered a place where people would be uncomfortable going because they would feel they'd have to buy something. Yeah, so like the example of like a Panera Bread meeting room has been used, and the Attorney General recommends you not use those kinds of spaces because people feel obligated to purchase. But like a library meeting room is usually a really good place because you can usually do those for free. Or if you have another school that's willing to let you use their space. Any other questions? That wasn't silly, by the way. It was a good question.
Just to get started, it's just right now a concept. Is there any person or any organization that you could recommend?
There are people and consultants who will help with writing charter applications. It comes with a really big price tag. We used to do that, but we don't anymore, and I'm actually really happy we don't anymore for various reasons. But when I would do an entire application, it would be at least $20,000 because it's a lot of work. Let me say why I don't like the idea of hiring a consultant to do it. What district are you in? Okay. Right, but you still need to apply in a specific district. And there are very specific rules about being allowed to cross district lines. So if you're approved by Broward, doesn't necessarily mean you can take a student from Orange because there are rules with regards to crossing district lines. The reason I don't like, Broward is not very, very strict about this, but a lot of districts will not allow consultants to talk when you go to do defense. So what happens is you write your application, the district reviews it, they will create a list of concerns that they have, and they'll meet with you to talk about those concerns. Most districts will, they're not required to. When you meet, a lot of districts do not want the consultants to talk, they want the board to talk. And if the consultant has written the application, the board members can't talk to it very well. And so they'll have a question like, well, you have this in the budget, what does that mean? And if the board members didn't write the budget, they don't know how to answer that question. And a lot of districts will say that that means that the board does not prepare to operate the school. That said, writing an application, if you've never done it before, is very, very difficult. And there's so much stuff that needs to go in there that if you've never gone through the process, you probably will forget things. And it's very difficult to get approved. So without hiring somebody to help you or to review it at least and give you feedback, I would say there's a very, very small chance of getting it approved the first time. And
speak from experience, it took us more than, I wrote that application, our application. But our district in Brevard worked with us the first time. Well, you missed this. And so when we went back again, everything that they told us to do, we did, because we didn't have.
And that's an important thing to know, is that every district is different. Brevard is fantastic, Orange County, wonderful. Some districts are not very charter friendly. And, you have to also keep that in mind too. If you have a district, you're working with a district that provides you that kind of support, but always run with it. Because it'll help you, get your contract approved by the first time around, for the second time around. And some districts will actually provide you help prior for you writing it or submitting it. You can ask them questions and they'll provide you some support.
in the next month or two, there's going to be a new charter application that goes before the State Board of Education. And if that's approved, all of the districts are probably going to require that you use that new model application. And the new model application, in my opinion, is a lot more difficult than the old one. And in the current draft, they're limiting the number of pages that you can put in, which I have an issue with, because most of the applications that I've written or been involved with, in order to get it approved, you need at least about 120 to 150 pages in order to fit everything in. And last draft I saw, I think the page limit was like 100 pages, single space 12-point font. So, yeah.
What are the main changes that they're making, or what are the main features that?
They're requiring more information and less pages.
Is it accountability?
Some of it is clarification. The state worked with NACSA, thank you, to develop an application that NACSA would more highly recommend in terms of being able to evaluate. So they changed some of the language around the reading plan, around the marketing. They made the ESP component an entirely separate component as opposed to part of the application. It's like an addendum. They have very specific. Thank you, like a management company. They have a very specific list of appendices which need to be included now, which wasn't in the past.
So it mainly lines up with that they have kind of a document that recommends standards.
The NACSA.
And
I'm not very familiar with NACSA standards, but I would assume that they align better.
Yeah. Okay. That they were involved in developing.
Yeah. It's in rule development right now. So they just had meetings the last couple months where people could provide feedback, and they're still accepting feedback on the newest draft, which just came out this last week.
So it's already been recommended for adoption.
It hasn't been given to I think they're planning on the election or the vote being in January, but they are still accepting public comments if people wanted to comment. I asked yesterday and they said they've gotten very few comments from operators. Most of the comments that they've gotten are from districts. So.
It's more work for districts too.
Yeah. Did I answer your question? Okay.
I have a question. Are most districts staffed to help with advice?
No.
That's what I thought.
I think most districts would agree that they don't have enough staff.
Yeah.
And some districts, they have one person who's responsible for doing pretty much everything, and they try to pull people in to review applications. And the other thing to bear in mind when you're doing applications is most districts, very few people actually read the entire application. So they'll take the ESE section and they'll give it to the ESE people. And so if you talk in section 4 about how you're going to do multi-tiered system of supports, but you don't talk about it in section 6, when the ESE people read section 6, they're going to say, you didn't even talk about multi-systems of supports, you don't know what you're doing. But you did talk about it in section 4, but they didn't read section 4. That's very common. Adam said one of the reasons that they're putting in the page limits is they're hoping that more district people will actually read the entire application. And that's one of the reasons that they're trying to institute page limits. But if you're a district like Miami and you're getting 60 to 80 applications a year, I don't think there's very many people who are going to read 80, 100-page long documents. I know I wouldn't. So, okay, sorry, I went off on a sidetrack. There are some people here that said this weekend or this week who do consulting work on charter applications. And actually my booth is right next to somebody who I know who does them. So if you come find me in the exhibit hall, I will introduce you. All right, any other questions? All right, moving on to tax exempt status. Lots of fun. So you're a corporation, which means you theoretically could have to pay taxes at some point, but you want to try to get out of paying taxes. So that's what this point is about. When you incorporated as a nonprofit entity, which means that you're set up not to earn huge profits. You can have profits every year. You don't call it profits, you call it a net gain or something like that. But you can accumulate money, and there are a handful of charter schools which have accumulated a lot of money in the state of Florida and are able to do some really great things with facilities and instruction because they've operated conservatively. So just because you're nonprofit doesn't mean you can't make money per se. You can put money in the bank, but it has to be used for nonprofit purposes. Then you also have your sales tax exemption, which means you don't, when you go buy something, you don't have to pay sales tax. So that's something you have to apply for, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then you have your 501c3 charity status, which you'll want to apply for. So those are the things I want to talk about. First off, sales tax exemption. A lot of schools mistakenly think that you cannot get sales tax exemption until you become a 501c3 organization. That's not true. The Department of Revenue will approve your sales tax application as soon as you have a contract. So as soon as you sign your contract with the district, get a copy of that contract, which in some districts can take a really long time, so you need to stay on top of them. But get a copy of your contract, and then there's a one-page form. That little screenshot there is the entire form. It's really easy. Send that in with your contract, and you should get your sales tax exemption. The benefit of that is then you don't pay that extra 7 or 8% on everything that you purchase, which saves you a lot of money. So do that as soon as you possibly can. The Department of Revenue used to approve it once your application was approved if you sent your minutes from the district. But the last couple times that I tried that, they wouldn't do it anymore. They actually wanted to see the contract. So it's dor.myflorida.com. And you just search for DR5, or you can just Google Florida DR5 and you'll find it.
Can you get approved just off of the 501c3 status or no?
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay.
But it's usually, it takes a lot longer to get 501c3 status.
I haven't heard back yet after we filed. I just haven't heard.
It usually takes about 6 months right now.
Yeah, we have.
So we have our.
So you're saying as soon as we sign the contract with the district?
Yes.
Then we can fill out the DR5 and present it to a vendor?
No, you send it to the state.
Send it, the form to the state?
Yes, and it usually takes like a week or two, and then you'll get the actual form back that you can give to the vendors. Yeah. And that's something that I would recommend making lots of copies of and give to every single person who buys stuff for your school, and keep in your electronic version of your files, so it's real quick to find.
Will this also suffice, because we want to start fundraising?
No.
Okay, you need the 501c3.
Yes. Well, no, you can fundraise. You can accept money from people before you get your 501c3. And if you are approved for your 501c3, they can write those off as tax exemptions. But if you're not approved, they can't. So most, like if you're doing formal fundraising and looking for grants, most grant people will not give you a grant unless you have your 501c3. So applying for your 501c3, there is IRS Form 1023 needs to be completed. There is an online version of 1023 now. I haven't done it that way, but I understand now you can go online and do it all online. There's also this document that the reviewers are supposed to use that's called the Charter School Guide Sheet. So when the IRS people look at your application, this is the questions that they're supposed to ask and find an answer to. So what I do when I help schools with doing their 501c3 applications, I take that guide sheet and I answer them for them. And I put in any narrative along with it, and I send that with the application. And it's been helping. Most of the schools that I work with have gotten through pretty quickly. The biggest thing that the IRS is looking for when they're looking at your 501c3 application is your involvement with your management company, if you have one. Because they want to make sure that this is not a for-profit company who has a little puppet board that they call a nonprofit who are applying for a 501c3. That's basically the way the IRS is looking at it. So if you say you're using a management company in your 501c3 application, you're going to be scrutinized a lot more. And you need to make sure you very clearly answer, especially about the separation of duties between your governing board and the management company. You need to have your own attorney. You need to have your own accountant, not a necessary accountant. You have to have your own auditor. But you also need to talk about how did your board select that company as your management company? Because that's a decision your board should be making, not your management company. You're supposed to start the school. It's supposed to be a nonprofit board. So those are the biggest questions that usually hold up the 501c3 applications right now. Other documents that you're probably going to need to include are your articles of incorporation, your bylaws. You need to have a non-discrimination policy in place. They'll want to see your budget for 5 years. They'll want your charter application, and if you have a contract, they'll want that, which makes this a very long document because by the time you attach those two things, they're big. You want to have board member resumes, your procurement policy, and your segregation of duties policy. Those are the things the IRS is going to want to see. And once you have all of that, the last one I did, I think, was probably about 800 pages when we sent it up to the IRS. And it takes about, their website says you should wait 180 days before you contact them to find out how it's going. My experiences lately, most of them have been coming back before 180 days. It used to be that they were taking like a year and a half, but they've actually finished their backlog now, so they've been staying up to date. But their website says you can't call them and ask for a status until 180 days. And it's $850, so you have to plan to pay that.
What if the governing board that is looking to open a school already has a 501c3?
Then you're fine. You can have one 501c3 for multiple schools if you have one governing board.
No, but would we need to review the 501c3 that the governing board has to make sure it?
Correct. The public purpose that was defined of how that was there needs to make sure that its education is in there, that you can't be using a 501c3 that was designed for something completely unrelated.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm guessing it's calendar days because I don't think they'd say 180 business days, but that's totally a guess. So this is something that you don't need to have in Florida to operate a charter school. You don't need to be a 501c3 organization. You just need to be a nonprofit corporation. But if you ever go do any fundraising or ever doing any grants, you're not going to get them unless you have your 501c3. Because if somebody donates money to you, they can't write it off on their taxes unless you have your 501c3. So that's why this is important. Also, most grants companies that give grants will not give you a grant if you're not a 501c3. Any questions on taxes? Oh, one thing I have to remember, personal experience. So every year when you do your audit, your auditor will usually also do your Form 990 for you. You should ask them to do that. Basically, it's a document that you send into the IRS that says how much money, revenue you brought in, expenses and stuff. But if you don't submit that Form 990, the IRS gives you a hefty fine. I forgot to send it in one year. It sat in, when I got the audits, I put them on my shelf and then opened up the folder and the 990 was in there and I didn't send it in and we got a bill for like $8,000 because I didn't send it in. If you beg really well, they'll forgive you for it.
They'll usually give you a one-time forgiveness, but you got to beg.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the tax return. It's like when you send your 1040, the 990 is the 1040 for a nonprofit. So, and then also if you don't file, let's say you set it up, you have one that you might have set up a couple of years ago. Even if you had no activity, you got to be filing every year. Because we've had that where schools had started, it took a while to get the school up and running. And the IRS went through and basically terminated the 501c3, so they have to go through the whole application process again.
So make sure you do that. I recommend having some kind of, remember I said systems for everything, some kind of a tickler system where you remind yourself every year at certain times of the year to do certain things. Put in August or September, file 990 so that you remember to do that every year. Personal experience. Okay. Other questions about taxes? Okay. Then contract negotiations. Usually when I do my governance presentation to governing boards, I tell them that you have to read your charter contract, even though it will probably put you to sleep. Now you actually have to read it with in mind that you're negotiating the contract. So you have to understand it really well. So there's a set of laws which govern charter schools, and then you have a contract with your district, which will probably further enhance or further define what those laws say in terms of what you're required to do. It's extremely important that you understand that charter contract and that you know what's in it before you sign it. There are a lot of districts who will stick some things into your charter contract, which a year from now, you will kick yourself for not signing. So you really, really, really want to make sure you understand that contract. And I say negotiations because it's kind of a farce, unfortunately. You're at a position right now where your application was approved and you really want that contract because you want to start getting your school up and running, and you have absolutely no negotiation. You have nothing to bargain with. It's the district is completely in control of this process. So some districts are really helpful and are willing to work with you and talk about certain things. Some of them say this is the way we do it in our district, and it's extremely difficult to get it changed.
Is there any movement in the state where the Department of Education actually negotiates the contract? Is it to that point, you're basically negotiating from an unleveraged position? The contract is really not negotiable.
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago, the state statute said that the Department of Education have a standard charter school contract.
And that's in your binder.
That's there now. That was passed and they went through rulemaking, but the districts aren't. They use that standard contract and then they add the different things. And then as an example, we're working with a school now that had language that if you had a negative fund balance in any fund, you would be in danger of your contract terminating. So the thing is if you buy a lot of capital assets, you could have one. You could be fine, but your government funds for accounting purposes, we'll talk a little bit, was negative. I mean, technically the district can terminate that contract. So those are the kind of little things that you need to make sure. And that's why it's so important to have an attorney review that before you sign those. Because once the things is you say, well, that's not in statute, but if you agree to it in contract, you basically agreed to it. So that's where it's very important.
There is no state charter contract that you can negotiate with like this.
Well, no, you have, again, it goes, it's where a lot of times where your bigger schools have the advantage because you have high-powered attorneys that go through it and then they play a game of chicken. And it's a game of chicken because you have to have the charter contract to open to get into terms, to get your enrollment stuff, and then it plays it because legally you can go to arbitration or go to mediation to get that, but it's how far are you willing to play chicken and how much are you willing to spend on your side,
and how much time you're willing to spend.
Correct.
I thought that most appeals were approved by the state. I thought.
Those are appeals. This is in the actual contract negotiation. So the way it happens is your charter gets approved and then they approve it and then the district provides you a contract. Now the district has a model contract from the state, but what they do then is they take that contract and they add language to it.
Or in some cases, they just say we're redlining the whole thing and using ours.
Yeah, so that's where you need to be very conscious. I mean, there's districts, younger bar,
Right.
correct. So you go in with your eyes wide open.
Yeah, that's why I do have a question. And I don't know if you have the answer to this. I'm clear on the model contract review that comes from DOE, Department of Ed. And I'm also aware that counties can do their own thing. My question is, you might not know for Brevard, because Brevard, I know you might think Brevard is tough. It's tough to get through Brevard County. Will they have the same, is it sometimes subjective and arbitrary, the additions or the?
Yeah.
So
you have to read the contract. Correct.
How would I know?
I mean, they're supposed to be treating everybody the same, theoretically.
Yeah.
Okay. But I've been in enough, we've helped over 100 some schools, maybe 200 schools, and no contracts the same. And then they add, and you just got to be very careful because it could be instead of a shall to a must.
And that's what I
Yeah,
did not
it's
know.
those kind of things, and that's where you
Right.
need to have an attorney that truly understands charter school law to
I
go
have
through
one
that.
more question, and I think it's just one more. Is it, is Brevard, well, in other counties held to, well, they are held to the same sunshine. So could I request, or the board request, or our attorney request, the copies
Oh,
of
absolutely. Sure.
the
You can
last
actually go,
contracts, let's
yeah,
say the last
it's
2 or 3
even,
years?
it's even easier without even having to go that route. Just go into the board minutes of your school boards, when the different contracts were awarded, and then the contracts there.
Most of the districts have it as part of their minutes.
Yeah, it would be in the minutes. That's the easiest way to.
To her point, some districts that we've experienced have much more of a favorable contract to encourage charter school development than others. So within the district, you could have uniformity of how contracts are structured to a certain degree. But between district to district, you'll find that the invitation is only as open as that contract invites you. So in the county that we're on right now, right here, it's Orange County, is very challenging to secure charter school contracts. It's the same process.
And Brevard is tricky too.
I've seen a lot of language that they've put in that's not in statute, and charter schools agree to it because they weren't aware of it.
Right.
So if you sign your contract and it has language in there that you didn't like, you've agreed to that language.
Right.
Even though there's a bunch, I mean, I think Brevard's one of the ones that says if you get less than a seat, but that's nowhere in statute.
Right. But Brevard does a lot of things.
Well, it's not just Brevard. I mean, I don't want to throw any particular district under the bus, but it's.
The statute would say one thing, but if they don't want to follow the statute, they.
Correct,
they
and
don't.
that's what we're saying. So again, the lesson is have an attorney review the contract. That's really the bottom line. An attorney that's very familiar with charter school law.
And there are very few of them in the state, so we have a list.
So if we find something that is not in statutes that they put into our contract, and we call them on that, for lack of a better term, what is their responsibility? Or
Well,
what is?
I mean, that's where negotiation comes in, and like you mentioned, I mean, you're not coming from a position of strength, but I mean, there's mechanisms in place, and just like, again, it's a timeline thing. Because they understand that, you have to get the contract signed, let's say to get a lease or get your facility or something like that. No one's gonna do that until you have it. But we've been able to work, with some schools with the caveat that you could always sign the contract they give you. And you're done. I mean, you have a contract. So the issue is, what parts of that bad language can you take out?
You're saying that the district can say that you have to be at least a C school.
Mhm.
If it's in your
They can say
contract.
anything in the contract. I mean, that's.
Because they don't want to authorize someone who's going to be a D or an F.
Correct, but
Right.
again, it's not a realistic, because they could change, right now, they change the grading system. So let's say the FSA comes out.
They changed the grading.
They changed the grading system, so now everybody's like either a D or an F because the new measures. So if you had in your contract that you're a C, now they can terminate your contract. It's just all those little things, and then it'll dovetail a little bit as we talk into facilities, because all these things become very important when you're negotiating on the facility side.
Are approved contracts between a charter and a sponsor something that would be public record requestable?
Yeah, that's what we were just mentioning, that the school board, at their board meeting, will approve the contract.
Right.
So in the minutes of those board minutes, you usually can pull those contracts right out.
All the contracts would be available there.
Yeah.
Most of the districts have it.
Yeah, and
If not,
then you can do it through
and the
information.
records request for things like that would be done through the district.
So the law says that there's supposed to be flexibility in charter contracts, and that they're not supposed to impose any this is the actual language from the statute, impose any unreasonable rules or regulations that violate the intent of giving a charter school greater flexibility to meet educational goals. But in practice, I don't see that happening very often. You have 70 days after your application has been approved to negotiate your contract, unless you're willing to agree to an extension. If you want to open next August, I would not agree to an extension because you need to get that in place as quickly as possible in order to get your facilities. And then if you cannot come to an agreement with your district, like your district has approved your application, but you cannot come to an agreement on your charter contract, you can go to mediation with the state, but that's a drawn out process and takes time. So that's where you kind of fall in. And then the standard contract language is there, and there's a copy of your standard contract in the binder. One of the things that I've used the standard contract for, because most of the districts that I personally have experience with don't use it, even though they're supposed to. They just say they redlined it all and used their own. What I've found helpful is if there's language that's more favorable in the standard contract, I'll propose that back to the district as the language that I think is more reasonable, especially with regards to your FTE payments. One of the things that you'll want to read very, very, very carefully is how you get your first couple of payments from the district. Because if it is based on your projection as of June 30th, or actual enrollment as of June 30th, you may only have 20 kids signed up on June 30th, but come August 15th, you may have 100 kids signed up, and you now only have enough money to pay for one staff person as opposed to 5 staff people. So the FTE thing is really, really important, and I like the standard contract language with regards to FTE. So that's one of the places where I've copied and pasted out of. Make sure you read everything very carefully in your contract before you agree to it. Even though you don't have very much negotiating room, one, you need to understand it because that's the terms you're living by. And two, if there's something you absolutely cannot live with, you want to make sure you try to talk about that more. Another example of something that I particularly get annoyed with in the contracts are school improvement plans. Because personally, I hate school improvement plans. I think that every school should have goals in terms of what they want to accomplish every year and should hold their kids to high standards. But the school improvement plan at the state level that the school districts have to go through is not conducive, in my opinion, to actually getting anything done with regards to students. It's a matter of collecting data and doing paperwork. And I get a little emotional on that, sorry.
Yeah, but Miami-Dade County is a county that has that in their contract, that every school has to have it.
The law says you only have to do a SIP if you are a D or an F school. But if your contract says you have to do a SIP, you have to do a SIP. And in their minds, SIP means this process that the state has put out, which is a lot of data collection and paperwork. So that's one of the things that I always look for in that things. Definitely should get an attorney during the contract negotiations. It's expensive, but you should not do this alone. Even if you are already operating a school and you think you understand charter contracts yourself, still you should hire an attorney. And these, remember, whatever you sign is what you have to live with for the next 5 years because the district doesn't have to come back and change anything later on. So you're stuck. I think it's in the, I think I put it in the binder. If not, it's on our website, a list of attorneys who focus on charter school. And any attorney who contacts me and asks me to be put on that list, I will put on that list. So I can't recommend one over another, but I will say that there's a few who are going to be here, which means that they actually are involved in the charter school community. So you might want to pay extra special attention to those.
Okay, on the facility side, and at the end of the day, probably one of the most important things is where you're going to house your students. Okay, so most of you're a new entity. So what is it what type of facility can you get? So most of the charter schools don't open in their permanent facilities. Okay, and the reason that is because you can't afford it where you're there, or unless you have somebody that's backing you. You have a national network, or you have some other mechanism in place. But a school that's starting off by itself will not have the resources to open into a permanent facility. So what do you look for? Okay, and one of the things is, you got to take a look at it as realistically what you're going to be. Now, it's very, very important to look at the demand area where you're going into, okay, and understand the demographics, because you could have the best school in the world, but if you put it in an area there aren't enough students, you're not going to succeed. Okay, so, and it's also taking a look at the mix. I know we were working with this was years and a long time ago, working with a school that was doing like their curriculum was kind of like a very high-end curriculum, but they found a facility in their city. The curriculum and the students did not match. I mean, it was the school failed miserable because it's just the teachers, the whole program that they had was not fit for that community. So again, looking at what that is, so that's very important. So you look at it. So usually most of them that you look at now is church facilities, schools like that close down, smaller facilities, that will let you open up and get involved. Now, the problem with going into churches, the one thing is because you're always negotiating with God, which is always a problem. Okay.
You're always going to lose, right?
No, because it's always, they come up with something. Okay. I've yet to do a church deal that's been simple. Okay. There's no such thing as a church deal that's simple because there's too many opinions. Okay. You're not dealing with it like a single landlord. It's always there. And then somebody always throws their 2 cents into it. So, if you look through that, but those are probably the best options for charter schools. Now, 10 years ago, you'd be able to open up in a shopping center or something like that. Easily you'd fill up because there wasn't really an option for charter schools. In today's world, it's much more difficult because parents are aware of what options of charter schools. Districts have created a lot more option programs or choice programs where they have magnet schools, they have different things. So across that, so districts have become, so it's no longer just getting there. So the thing is if once you find the facility where you want to go into, and then one of the things I found is you want to hire, have professionals, realtors and stuff that can help you with the search. But probably the best thing to do is just drive the neighborhood you want. Okay, drive around, see that. I mean, in Miami-Dade, where you have now, they're up to about 14-15% of the students are in charter schools, and there's a lot of big charter schools constantly looking for sites. But I still see that the schools that went out and got in their car, drove around the neighborhood, and walked in, talked to a church or something like that, that found a facility, been able to get in. So that would be, the recommendation is to find a realtor or somebody like that that can help you get with you with the program and see what they can find. Okay, and then so that's where you want to try to build your team, bring board members that are part of the community, that mainly in the area, try to get as most influential person that you can get on the board from the local community is very important, because as you go along, that also becomes an important factor for down the road as you have it. And then determine the size. I mean, the realistic size of where you want to be on the school side. Okay, do you want to be a school for 300 kids, 1,000 kids? I mean, we've worked with schools that open up with 1,300 kids. We've worked with schools that open up with 80 kids. Okay, so but the ones that are opening up with 1,300 kids are probably have $800,000 to open up beforehand for marketing, research. There's a lot of things that go into play with those things. So, and then I think that's where one of the key components of this is making sure you have enough cash. That adage I believe so firmly on, that you are in business, you run out of cash. It's very, very important at the beginning, because what Curtis mentioned is really important with looking at the cash flow timing. Because years ago the districts were very good about paying you on your estimated revenue. Okay, and they started paying you on that revenue. So you say you're going to have 300 kids, they start paying you on 300 kids in July. So you have the cash flow to do it. Nowadays, unless you can prove to the district that you have those kids, they're not going to be paying you that money. Okay. I mean, the one school that we opened up this year with 1,150 kids, the district was paying them on 80. Okay, through August. I think finally in September, the district said, oh, okay, I think we made you scream loud enough, because the school was short about $1.4 million in that time frame. Luckily, this organization had the resources to bridge it. But I mean, if you didn't have that to that scale, let's say you're looking at 200 kids, but you're getting paid on 20 or 50 kids, you're not going to be able to do that. And what's important is your landlord doesn't care. Okay, they want the rent payment. And specifically, you go into the churches, boy, be late on that rent check with the church, God's going to be angry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's if you look at that, because it's interesting, because now in the press you hear Jeb Bush with the Liberty City Charter School, which is interesting. You see that whole thing. That was a lease dispute. Yeah, he was the first charter school in the state, and then that school was shut down, and it was shut down because of a lease dispute. The school was serving Liberty City inner city kids in a school. It closed down because of an issue that could have been solved by a $10,000 deal between the landlord. Instead, it mushroomed into about an $900,000 litigation, and the school got shut down for that. So again, it goes into negotiating and making sure those leases are there. And it's as with a charter contract, as you go look at the lease, make sure you have a real estate attorney look at it. Okay, so now we got attorney number 2. Because your charter school attorney is usually not a real estate attorney. Now, if you're dealing with a firm that has it, usually somebody within the same firm can do it and you're comfortable with. But if you have an attorney on your board that's a litigator, that's not who negotiates a real estate transaction. Again, that's a different business that you're in, okay? You come in from the education business. Real estate business is a completely different business, okay? Different skill sets, so hire people that know that portion. Again, this again comes into making sure the resources are there to start up and spend that. Yeah, it might cost you $10,000 or something, but it could, do that. I think we're working with a school that signed a lease that the first, they came to us, they say, oh, we're doing great. We got an awesome lease. The first year I think they were paying $10,000 a month. Year 2, it jumped to like $50,000. It's like, what are you going to do year 2? Well, we'll work on it. I'm like, no, this is what the contract says. You'll be in default of your contract. In the school, and guess what? As soon as you are in default of any financial obligation, then you become into a financial emergency. And you can lose your charter. Again, those are caveats that you got to look again into your charter contract. But that would be, at that point, by statute, you are in a financial emergency. So you need to do a recovery plan and all that stuff. So those are the things to look at when you're looking at, on the real estate side of it, because again, before you get into the stuff that you really love, which is educating kids, you got to deal with all this stuff first, okay? And make sure you put it into a sound footing. And that's where having the board members that are there and then having the team to help you, bring those people together. And it's very, I can't stress how important that is on the front end of doing that and being, and I think that's just why we started this, pre-opening stuff, is because we got, more me got tired of, Curtis loves getting the calls and helping people. I got tired of getting these calls at the end and say, what do we do now? I'm like, we woulda, coulda, shoulda, but, so we're trying to avoid the woulda, coulda, shoulda.
That's the question, and I understand that the finances, the money piece is the number one reason that charter schools go under. Are you aware of any districts in the state where the district allows a charter to use one of their facilities that is underutilized or not being utilized? Because we're considering that.
Correct. They are, and statute allows that.
Yeah, I know statute
promotes that.
Right, yeah.
I've seen very few cases.
It's in theory.
In theory.
In reality.
In theory, that's definitely there. There are examples. We work with a couple schools that have been able to do that. Again, it depends on the school district, how much they're willing to do that. I mean, I think we're working with one school in Broward that they said that, the school moved in and then the district keeps taking classrooms from them. So, but yeah, no, that would be, depending on the area, because sometimes you want to create that, one of the things we're saying that the districts have, the best thing to do is remember, all businesses, enterprises are people. Okay, it's not, so the district isn't this like, the district's accumulation of people. Okay, so reaching out and communicating with the district as much as you can, get to know the district people on a personal level. Okay, because at the end of the day, most people are good. I mean, it's just, they're there. The issue that restricts them is when you have policies coming in and it's, their job then says, this is my role. But if you're there having good communication with them, I've seen a lot of progress made by, honey, what's that saying? You get more with honey than you do with vinegar. Oh, I got that one right. But that's the key. So, I mean, if you look to the district and it's talking to them, I mean, and the districts we have the best relationships with is the ones we sit down and we talk with people. And that's where it's at. And then it's much easier to solve problems when you have that personal relationship. Okay. So that's why I stress that. And mainly when you get into with the finance people, I mean, now one school I gave you the example is if we would have had an adversarial relationship with the district, they would have just said, look, I'm not giving you that money until October. I mean, and you really couldn't have done anything about it. I mean, they could, it's up to them. But they understood. They're like, oh yeah, no, we work with you. Sorry. And they actually, not only, they actually retroactively paid us and then started paying us more. So we were able to collect all the money. But that took having, communicating with them and just seeing what the districts are. So when you go to your facility, it's all those things, because also, and this becomes really crucial when you're about to open, because your contractor and everything will not have everything in place on time. Okay. And I always say, whenever you go to do a construction job or remodeling job, make sure you get 2 quotes and you add them up, and that's what it's going to cost you. Okay, this is all from experience. So, but it's having that relationship, because we've seen schools that had a really bad relationship with the district that, they missed their CO by 1 day, because you have to have it by 30 days. The district said, too bad, you're opening next year. So now here you are, they got everything done. They got their CO. They were 1 day late on their CO. And the school wasn't opening for another 29 days. And this was like, because they just, they were very antagonistic toward the district. So, and I've seen it the other way, where they work with them and they bring them to the job site. Look, here's what we're doing. We're going to be ready to open here. All we need to do is this, this, and this. Yeah. Work with it. We're fine. Don't worry about it. We're good. I mean, we had one school 2 years ago where there was 68 days of rain. We had 68 days of rain during the summer. Okay. They weren't able to pour the parking lot. Okay, so now as a parent driving by or the district driving by, they'd look at the school and it's all mud and dirt and everything. They could see the building look done. The building had all the furniture in, all ready to go, but you couldn't finish it up front. So they couldn't get their CO. So again, this is where they had a good relationship with the district. They brought them and said, look, the building's done. We're ready to go. As soon as it stops raining for 2 days, we can get this done. But again, if you would have looked at the letter of your contract, it said, I need to have that within, 30 days, or you open in there. And that was a large school. So it's looking at those things and creating that relationship. So as you go through the process, loop the district in early on those things. Because I've now gone up to a couple districts that were very, not very charter friendly in getting that. But once you told them, look, this is the program we're going to do, let's work with your guys to see where's the best area. And it changes the attitude completely. Then they come up and they said, hey, we have this area. There's a need right here, or something like that. And then when you have unique, innovative programs, they'll work with you. Okay, so.
That's really good advice, because the districts deal with a lot of people that don't answer emails, that try to get away with everything that they can, et cetera. And they're public funds, so they're trying to safeguard them. It's not that they don't like charter schools, it's that they are charged with this public trust. So all you have to do is be trustworthy and let them know.
And be open,
because
100%. Unless you're going to cheat, then be antagonized. But if you're going to if you want to do the right things, there's no sense in not being completely open and upfront, because it all comes out anyways.
District just doesn't want to have to reassign all those kids 2 days before school starts. I mean, there's practical things.
Right,
29
exactly.
days
So
isn't much, but it's not, and we're since 28. So.
Yeah, but it's having that to understand what it is.
Communication.
It's communication. So if you're there and they know what the issues are, then it's easier. It's when they don't know what the issue is, because it could be where you're going to be a month late. And then you're trying to hide it or whatever, and then that creates big problems for the district and the people of how you do that. So, just understand that on your first year, you're going to be in a temporary facility, in a rented facility, because unless you have somebody that's bankrolling you to do that. And then from there, just get a game plan on what your future will be. But those are future discussions on how you finance and how you build on that. So. I'll go to the next one. Yeah, then, oh, I should have done this one. The most important part, pricing. Okay, charter schools all get about the same revenue. Okay, so that means when you're looking at your income statement, that top number is about the same on a per student basis for everybody, okay? And they cost you a certain amount to educate the students, okay? So you only have a certain amount left to pay for your facility, okay? Try to negotiate per student rents, okay? We've been able to do this quite successfully with a lot of schools, okay? And then years ago that nobody did this. Now, most of the church facilities, most of these, because you align your landlord with your goals, okay? Because then if you're into a community, they're better off if you get more students because they get more rent. And the way to look at it is you probably don't want to go more than $1,000 a student, somewhere in there. I mean, you can go a little higher if you got more students, but if you're less students, you want to be a little lower. Somewhere around that number is where you want to be. If you start going too much beyond that number, I don't care how good you are, you're not going to have enough money to pay the teachers because it's the same bucket. I mean, the same amount of money comes into that pair of pants. You know, how much you have in each pocket, it's there. So, you used to do budgeting where you stuck money in envelopes, how much you had for each thing. Okay, so this is how much you have for rent.
Could you give us a negotiating tip with that? We're struggling. Our top priority right now is trying to find a facility. And when we talk to landlords and even real estate agents, they want to talk per square foot. My property.
Okay, so you can back
$50
it.
per square foot.
Too much.
I know. I mean, so how do you get?
Okay, here's the way you back it. Okay, here's how
the reality.
Okay, here's how you back into it. Okay, on average, now you have an architect here that does district schools, so the numbers are completely different.
Yeah.
On a charter school, you're operating at about 55 square foot per student. Okay, so if you need, 1,000 students, or let's say 500 kids, you're at, 27,000 square foot building. Okay, you're doing 100, so that's the way you back into it. So now if you're at $1,000 a student, you divide that and it gives you, so if you're looking at it by the number of students you want, let's say.
We can use 500. We'll grow it.
Okay, let's say, so you go 500, right? So you're at 27,500 square feet. And you can pay $1,000 a student, right? So that's 500,000. So you do 500,000 divided by 27.5, you're at $18 a square foot. Okay, so
And how much is that per?
It's about
per year?
$1,000. So that's $18 a square foot, so you're paying $500,000 a year in rent. Well, you have 500 students.
Well, yeah.
So that's why I say, the way I look at it, ideally, you want to be between, anything south of $18 a square foot. Okay, unless, then, but because one of the things is, a lot of the older, older private schools that you have from churches and stuff like that, tend to have much larger classrooms, because remember, originally, education, if you remember the old Catholic schools and stuff, you're 35, 40 kids per classroom. Okay, so those classrooms are 800-900 square feet. Now, because of class size, you can only put 18 kids in that classroom. So those buildings, you definitely want on a per student basis, because you're gonna have a lot more square footage than you have. So it's the efficiency of the use of the space. Okay, because I've seen in schools where then you do co-teaching models where because the classrooms are big enough that you can actually divide it into two, and you do, co-teaching and stuff like that, and you get it. But on average, that's kind of like the metrics that we use.
Now, for the per student rent negotiation, is that in terms where you write the lease agreement that it would be per student? Because I've also seen some lease agreements where they say, okay, year 2, the lease agreement will be based off X amount per student at 850 students. You're kind of locking yourself.
Well, a lot of times they're going to put a minimum. Okay, so you're going to say, we're going to do it per student with a minimum of 100 kids, a minimum of 200 kids. So, because remember, on the other side of it, they need to have a certain amount of revenue coming in. So these are very common in shopping centers when you do the stores open up, this is the way leases are all done. They're done as a percentage of sales, which is. So just try to get as much as you can on that, because you want to try to also align mainly with churches to align that, look, we're here, reach out to your community to help bring kids in. Because the more kids you bring in, the better we all are. But again, just do the math before you sign. And even as you look to your out years, make sure it still makes sense. Okay, when you're looking at that, because once you get paying, and then if you look at schools that failed for financial reasons, take a look at what their lease rates or their cost of occupancy was as a percentage of revenue. I guarantee you it was over 20%. In most of them, you want to stay between 15 and 17%. Ideally, you want to stay below 17%. I mean, I've seen schools down to the 8, 9s, which is wonderful. But because again, that extra money goes into the education, because we work a lot in DC where you're getting it's something like over $15,000 a student, where $3,100 can be for your facility per student. In Florida, that's half our FTE. I'm like, that's easy. I mean, this is easy math, guys. You can make it work. So, but here it's much tougher on that.
Yes, 1,000 that you're talking about is pertaining to the rent, that information.
Correct.
What is the overall per student that charter school would get?
On revenue, it depends on the school, but I want to say somewhere between 6,700 and 7,200, somewhere in there, because you get different dollar amounts for the different kids in the SEN, and there's a bunch of different factors, but somewhere around maybe 6,500.
I usually use 6,500 as a round number when playing, but I also usually put an asterisk after that you shouldn't use round numbers, because I'm the kind of person when to balance a checkbook, every penny has to match. Richard's not.
I'm a finance guy, so the accountant.
Any questions on facilities? We did a webinar. We've done a couple webinars on facilities, but there's one listed here where we're kind of talking about finding and planning for facilities. I think Richard actually did this one that talks a little bit more about the financing side of things. So if you wanted to go on and watch that, you could. I have 3 more sections left, and I have 43 minutes. So I'm not going to take a break if that's okay. And I'm going to try to talk a little bit faster so I can get through everything, which hopefully you can keep up with me. My daughter asked me one time why I wasn't an auctioneer. All right, so marketing and enrollment is the next piece I wanted to talk about. I actually have the $6,500 on this slide. This is essential because your money comes based on how many students you have. So if you have an awesome program for 200 kids and you only have 75 kids show up at your door, your program for 200 kids is not going to work because you're getting 75 times the number that you're getting per kid. So enrollment is essential during those first few months in terms of marketing and getting things out and running. Most charter schools overestimate how many students they're going to have year one. And every time I tell that to a new school, they say, oh, well, we're a unique case. We're not going to fall into that bucket. And 6 months later, I find out that they are under-enrolled of where they thought they were going to be. Very seldom does a school actually start with the number of kids that they anticipate having. So as you're working on your budget, make sure you build in the flexibility and start planning on having lower enrollment than you anticipate. Statewide, the average charter school in the state is 197 kids their first year. Now that is 197 kids, and that number is skewed because you have some management companies that start really, really huge, and you have some small schools that start really, really small. So what I did is I took off the top 5% and bottom 5% of outliers, and the average then was 167. So you see that the number does skew high. So plan on somewhere between 157 to 200 kids is kind of your maximum in year one, unless you're working with a management company that has huge resources that they can pour a lot of money into marketing. This chart is a little complicated, but the top part that says years 1 through 5, 197 is the average for the first year charter. 276 is the average for a second year charter. 312 is the average for a third year charter, and so on. So you can kind of see the average growth model in the state based on all of the schools that have opened since, I think, 2002. And then, or 2001. The second tab on the bottom kind of shows the way the number for first year schools has grown over time. So right now we're kind of in if we look at only the schools that opened in 2014, the average was 224. So they're starting to get a little bit bigger than they were in the past, but you can see that there's kind of been a bubble and a wave in there in terms of the way the enrollment is gone. So what I recommend that you start thinking about is to develop your marketing stuff. And this is stuff that would be now, like you should have this ready by the end of December timeline. Think about what is your brand, how are you selling your school, and how are you going to start marketing your school. I would develop an elevator pitch, something that you can throw off in 30, 60 seconds about what your school is and what it means and how you're going to involve parents so that you can start selling it to every single person you meet to try to bring more people in. And think about what it is that makes your school unique and what makes you who you are, because that's really what you need to tie into your marketing. And why are parents going to choose your school over another one? So we did a webinar. Actually, if I remember right, the person who did this webinar, like very last minute, like I called her that morning and asked her if she'd do it because the other person backed out, but she still did a pretty good job. So there's a webinar there on marketing if you're interested. So you want to develop your brand. One of the things that I recommend doing, and this may just be because I'm anal, in case you didn't pick up on that as I've been talking. I recommend developing a style guide. So this is an example. I changed the name of the school here, but like I have the logo in here. I picked out the colors. I'm colorblind, so anytime I pick colors, I need the numbers of the colors. So I picked out the colors that we use every time we do something for the school, and I put the numbers down because I need the numbers. And then we pick out the fonts that we're going to use on all of the school stuff. And the reason I do this is because I want things to look consistent and to be professional and marketed well. A lot of mom and pop schools that don't have a marketing team behind them will kind of just throw things out there and it doesn't really look very professional, and that might work for some schools, but I think you are asking parents to put a whole lot of faith in you because you don't have a building, you don't have a principal, you don't have teachers, you don't have a curriculum, but you want me to send my kid there next fall. Okay. You're selling yourself, so anything that you can do to make yourselves look more professional and more on top of things, I think goes a long way in selling yourself as an organization. So little things like this, that all of your brochures that you send out have the same kind of feel, makes it look more professional and presentable. And then along with the way things look, you also want to consider what the message is behind it. I just tend to be more on the graphic side. There's actually he left the room now, but there's a guy in here who proofreads my stuff and really doesn't like the way I write. So, but the colors always go fine. So yeah, so that's something that I think is really important. If you want to see that example that I just opened up on the screen, that bit.ly link up there will open it for you if you want to go and look at that as a sample. The next thing you need to think about is how you're going to be spending your money for marketing. You can spend a lot or a little on marketing, and in my opinion, get the same results. This is my opinion. Other people will disagree with me on this, but I personally think that marketing is a pretty big drain of money, and there's not a whole lot of benefit for it. It was many, many years ago now, but when I did my master's research, my question was marketing in charter schools and what's effective. And by and large, with the results of the survey that I did, our word of mouth and people to people was way more important than paid advertising. So whatever you can do to build that word of mouth among your community and among the parents that you're seeking out is the best thing that you can do for your marketing. Brochures and flyers are easy because you can hand them out. You can leave them at the library. You have something you can mail out. Mailing is the one thing that I think is worth the cost. Like if you have an open house coming up, send out postcards inviting people to come to your open house.
I can vet for that. That was the most effective form of marketing, and I laughed when they suggested we do a direct mail. And in Minnesota, it was the most effective thing that got people in the door. And you can target those pretty easily by the family, the income level. If the people have children, they have all that information. And we spent $1,500, and I could tell you the exact number, but there got a lot of people in the door, and people walked in with the postcard that we sent them. So,
but I would, if you do a mailing, don't just send out your brochure and leave it at that. Have a call to action. Have an open house that you're inviting them to come to, and then do a really good job of selling yourself at that open house. When I was a principal, we used to use our district's mailing list. Like we could get the kids off from the other schools. It turns out that I violated some privacy law or something and got a cease and desist order. And then we renegotiated our contract, and I actually negotiated into our contract that we had the rights to use the district's mailing list, and then it was no longer a privacy concern. Most districts probably are not going to let you, but it's worth at least asking. If you're opening this middle school, if you could get a list of the 5th graders who are graduating. They'll probably say no, but it's worth at least asking. If they say no, those marketing mailing lists, you can just Google buy a mailing list, and there's lots of companies out there, and they got little sliders that you can choose how many people and what area you want to go in. It's really easy to use. That's the only thing I think is worth spending money on personally, but other people disagree with me. Your website, in my opinion, is extremely important because nowadays that's where people are going. You want a website that looks good on a computer and on a mobile screen because most people, not most, but about half people now are only using mobile screens as opposed to large screens. So develop a website, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. Social media is also something that a lot of schools are finding success with if you do it well. There was a school that we worked with in Broward where this principal, I don't think he ever slept, but he was really, really good with the social media. He was responding to parents on Facebook. He was posting stuff every day about like this model works well with what we're going to do at our school. Read this article. He was really, really good about keeping parents up to date on Facebook. And personally, I don't like Facebook, but that is where people are. So that is something that you need to do. You can also do paid marketing on social media. Some people have found success with that, and you can narrow it down to mothers between this ages within these zip codes are the only people who should see this ad, and you only pay for the number of times that ad shows up. So that's a pretty reasonable cost for marketing, but it is a paid thing if you wanted to pay for that. Events and open houses, I think, are really important. The schools that I have seen that have opened large do an open house once or twice a week for several weeks, where lots of parents can come in and view the school and see what's going on. So a couple of the schools that I work with, they just set a regular schedule, like every Tuesday at noon and Thursday at 6, we have an open house, come join us. And then the principal just does the same sales pitch, and when he was doing it, he was getting pretty small groups so that he could actually have good conversations and build that relationship with the parents, which is really important. If you do only 1 or 2 events, you're gonna have potentially, if you do a good job of mailing it out and things, you could have a lot of people there. And it's really difficult when you have a lot of people to make those personal connections, which are going to sell your school at this point.
One other thing I'd like to add on that is like when you're doing your events in your open houses, it's so critical to have people who are working those events know what's going on with the school. Because if you have people that just volunteer at the last minute and they don't know anything, like you said, that parent is, there's no way I'm bringing my kid there. So that can be a tremendous asset if you don't plan well and also urge.
Yeah.
You only have one chance for a first impression.
So think through about, if you were a parent coming into this meeting, how is it going to appear to me? Then you have paid advertising if you want to pay money. You have newspapers, TV, radio. TV is really expensive, and I personally don't think it's all that effective. Radio, I would say between the two is probably a bit more effective if you pick the right stations that match your target demographic. Newspapers, I don't know very many people who still read the newspaper, but some people say it's an effective media, but it's there.
Another thing that helps as well is if you can find areas that kids are. So like Little League or some kind of sporting venue. A lot of parents the flyers go a long way there. A lot of times the decision maker about where a child goes to school is going to be the mom. And at a lot of the sporting events, you find a ton of mothers, and those are also very beneficial to get.
Some of the schools that we've worked with have done things like, on like bus benches. You can put ads on there. They put ads on there because they were in lower socioeconomic status. So a lot of their parents rode the bus. So think about where your parents are going to be and how you can approach them. With regards to your website, there is a Florida statute which says you need to have certain things on your website. So you should be aware of that statute. It's in the 1002.33. I think it's somewhere around subparagraph 20-ish, somewhere in there. It's one of the newer laws.
And then the auditors will check this.
They should.
And the district will check this to make sure you're in compliance with your charter contract. Okay. So that's too important, very important, because that could be, that it actually is good cause for termination if you don't follow the statute on that.
So on the screen here is what the statute says you're required to have on your website. Obviously, some of these things may not apply to you in your first year. You don't have an annual audit yet, so you can't put your audit online. but you should have a place where you can drop it in as soon as you get it. Same thing with like your school grades. You're not going to have that initially. But you do need to have your board members listed. If you have any management companies, you need to have those listed. Your board meeting minutes on a quarterly basis need to be posted. So those are things that are important that you have online. It's in your handouts. When you're thinking about your website, think about the ease of management versus the cost. So if you want to go out and buy, there's a company, for example, I think it's Educational Networks. They focus on doing websites for schools. They look great, but in my opinion, they're expensive. But if you have the money to go that route, it's a really nice website. Most of the schools that I work with, what I'll do is I'll set up a WordPress installation, and then I'll do a theme for them and set it up and get it looking nice. And then I'll teach somebody at the school how to do the WordPress and how to put in posts. In my opinion, the most important thing with regards to a website is that somebody at the school can post information regularly. Because if it's just a static site that never changes, it's not very helpful. It should be a communication tool. So think about what's the purpose. Is it marketing? Is it communicating with my current families? What's the purpose, and make sure that it's set up to do that. My opinion is if you're setting it up to communicate with families, it's also going to be a very good marketing tool, because one of the things in my experience that parents are most looking for in their school is communication with the school. And if you have a strong base of communication and open communication with your families, that's a huge thing for marketing. So just whatever design you choose and whatever platform you use, make sure it matches what you're doing. There's also things like Squarespace, which is relatively inexpensive, but if you don't have the technical experience to put up a WordPress site, it's a little bit easier. But so there are different options available, but I would do this now and get a site set up and up and running. Next thing is your enrollment timelines. So start thinking about when you're going to start your marketing campaign and when you want to enroll people and when you're going to do your lotteries. The law says very vaguely that you have to enroll any eligible student who submits a timely application unless the number of applications exceeds the capacity of the program class size, grade level, or billing. In such case, all applications shall have an equal chance of being admitted through a random selection process. That's what it says about the lottery. That's it. So there's not a whole lot there. The state has recommended that all students should go through the lottery process. So you shouldn't say we're going to have a lottery on this date and then everybody else is first come, first serve. You're not supposed to do that. So what I recommend doing is you set up a schedule like every other week or every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks, you're running a lottery up until a certain point, and then like at the end of every month, you run a lottery again for anybody who's applied that month or something like that in terms of a process for your enrollment. I think the next one is a chart. So think about when does your district do an open enrollment for their public schools, and whenever they're doing their open enrollment, you should have your stuff ready because that's when your parents are looking. You want to make sure you can tie in with what your district is doing. I wrote a computer program that does student registrations and lotteries for schools, and so I went in preparing this application and I pulled the dates for when people have applied. So this chart represents the first bar for each month is the beginning of the month and the middle of the month and the end of the month, when the applications are coming in over the course of the year. So you can see that there are huge spikes at the end of January, early February, and then March and May are kind of where the spikes are when parents are applying for schools. If you know when parents are applying for schools, you should know when you should be marketing to parents and out there looking to parents. So really, my opinion is you should start at the end of December, have everything ready to go, so that in January you have an enrollment process, you have your applications out there, and you're accepting applications, and you have a process for your lottery in place.
No, she had a question just to clarify, which is on the lottery. What he said is, you have lottery time period. So, for example, you're doing it on a 4 week. So, everybody that you got in that 4 week, you run a lottery. So, if you didn't have enough, if you didn't get enough applicants, then basically everybody in the lottery got accepted.
Okay, I get it, because I didn't understand the reason for lottery if I'm not at my
No.
enrollment. Yeah.
But you want to do that so that does that. So everybody before that date got accepted. Okay.
So it's clear.
It's clear. So then you have another one. So now on the second one that you do, you only have a certain amount of spots. So you run a lottery and then they get it.
I understand. It's clear now. Thank you.
So this is a sample schedule for one school that I was working with. Here's another visual chart that another school did to say their deadline and when the lottery would be held. But I would recommend publishing that. If you are a CSP recipient, you will have to publish that, and that's something that the CSP office will ask for, the grants office. So remember before I said everything should have a system? This is a huge system you should have in terms of how you're accepting applications, how you're filing them, how you're keeping them private because that has student information, student records, how you're going to run your lottery, how you're going to notify your parents, and then how do you monitor your enrollment over time. I have seen schools where they have a spreadsheet and their spreadsheet becomes overwhelming and then they're trying to keep track of everything and it becomes difficult. Make sure you think through all of those steps beforehand. There are products that you can purchase that can help you with this kind of thing, but again, that's money and you have to determine whether or not you're willing to spend money.
Quick question. Can we begin enrollment without having a contract with the district? I know that sounds silly, but
you can have, because
a signed contract. I guess I should say a signed contract.
Not a signed contract, because you want to have at least had the board, basically had the school board basically agreed and accepted that
what our
that
enrollment
you're an
policy is.
approved charter, and then you have the contract. Again, this goes into the negotiation, but because at the end of the day, all you have to do is sign it.
Right.
Okay, what they give you, but you want to at least have gotten a contract before you start marketing. And I think
I
some
wouldn't
districts-
accept any students until after you have it signed. But
About an interest, a form of interest. Is that,
yeah, because you want to start building your database now.
is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you want to do
Not
that.
an
I mean,
application form, but an interest form.
I personally wouldn't have a problem. You may want to check with your district contact accepting applications, as long as there's something on your website or on the application form that says that, currently in development or something, I don't know. But I personally wouldn't have a problem accepting applications if the district says it's okay. But I
You're
wouldn't
saying
think.
don't accept the student, just accept the application.
Correct.
Correct.
Because you
Right.
can't
So we
accept
wouldn't
it
run.
until
We
you
wouldn't
have it
run
signed.
essentially the
run the
lottery,
lottery.
but we can accept.
Because we've had schools, because we've saw, in some districts that, and this happens with the bigger schools, where once they put them into the system, we've noticed that the school district then sees that change and they start calling that parent to say, why are you leaving? Here we offer this program kind of thing. So some of these schools have gotten wise to it and basically take all the applications and just enter it into the system at one point. But, you want to make sure you have a contract that's at least there, so you're not doing it. But yeah, try to get as much, because again, you need to get the buzz out, you need to get the excitement, you need to get that, you need to get the sense of urgency too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times parents, if they can wait or whatever, but you need to get that, create the emotion. Former boss of mine used to say, you want to create the party, and people want to come.
And then once you have those people signed up, the next thing that I think is really important is that you maintain relationships with those families. The social media guy that I was talking about before, he did a fantabulous job of doing that, keeping the people engaged. One example, when we opened a new school where I was, is every day I would go around the building and I would take pictures of the construction from the same spots, and so you could kind of see a progression of the construction. I've seen schools that have done like GoPros where they post them and people can watch. Those kinds of things keep the parents coming back to your website, and then you can put other information on there as well. But you want to do whatever you can to build trust in your families that you are going to open on time, because there's been a lot of news stories about schools that have not opened on time, and you're probably going to have parents who are a little worried and apprehensive about joining this charter school thing if they're not feeling comfortable with you and with your leaders. So make sure you're keeping your families engaged. Moving on to administration. The next big question after marketing that you need to ask yourself is, when are you going to hire your principal? And that's an expensive decision, because the earlier you hire, the more you need to pay that person, and the less money you have no money coming in until July unless you have an outside source of funding. My opinion is that the best case scenario, you hire your principal in January, but that's almost impossible unless you have a financial backer behind your school. I would say that the worst case scenario is to wait until summer, because by then you need to have all your families enrolled, you have a lot of work to be done, and it's almost impossible to hire somebody in June to have them open a school in August. It has been done. When it has been done, in my opinion, it has not been done well. So I would say probably in order to do it well, drop dead date would be sometime in April to hire your principal. That means that you're going to have April, May, June that you need to pay your principal with no income. If you are a CSP school, you have 3 months that you can pay with the CSP money. But that's a competitive thing we'll talk about at the end. is your group, the longer you wait to hire your principal, the more work your board needs to do. So how active is your board in this process, and how active are they going to continue to be as you go forward? Then you need to think about money, which we talked about already. The other thing that I think is really important is really when you're talking about recruitment, yes, you're selling your board, but more importantly, you're selling your principal, because that's who your parents are going to get to know. And if you have a principal earlier, you can have the principal building those relationships with the families earlier, which is going to help you with your marketing and enrollment. We're going to talk more about the actual process of hiring an administrator in January when we get together. So I'm going to skip over a lot of that now, but you want to start thinking now about who's going to be doing the interview and how are those decisions going to be made. It used to be, my recommendation was that you sign up for teachersteachers.com. It used to be free, and it was an awesome resource for hiring teachers and administrators and people at schools. It is no longer free. The state contract that covered that is not in place anymore. So now it's like $900-ish per school. They have a booth set up out in the conference center. Now that they're not free, my guess is it's going to be less of an awesome tool, because it used to be that everybody knew that all of the districts and all of the charter schools use teachers. So if you wanted a job, that's where you went. But now if there's less schools using it, it may, in my opinion, become less of an effective tool. But we'll see. Don't tell him I said that, though, because I used to get along with him pretty well. Any questions on that? All right, next thing is accounting. This is my last major headline, so we're almost done. Accounting in November. So you don't have a whole lot of money flowing in and out right now, so you probably don't have to worry too much about accounting stuff right now. But come a few months from now, you are going to be having a lot of expenses with regards to getting your school up and running, so you need to start building that system again on how you're going to handle money. So you need to start thinking about who's going to be approving checks, how are those checks going to get signed, and how are you going to be keeping those records. Because even though you're not a school yet, when your auditor does your audit at the end of 2016-17, they're going to be looking at all of this pre-stuff as well. And you're going to need to make sure you have all of your receipts and everything in place for this pre-planning period as well. So you need to make sure you have a system in place for dealing with all of that. Make sure you're keeping copies of all of your receipts. I like computers, so I have a scanner that sits right next to my computer, and everything I receive paper-wise, I scan and I put into my file system online, and that's where I keep my receipts. That works for me. If that doesn't work for you, you need to develop a system that would work for you. But whatever process you're using, make sure you have a detailed place. Probably right now, because you don't have a lot of finances coming in and out, you could use a spreadsheet and just like a simple check register to keep track of things until you come up with a more effective system. Most schools that we have experience with use QuickBooks as their financial system. When I was running a school, we used QuickBooks on mine. I liked it as a principal because I had access to it from any computer I was on, and our accountant could get on there, and I could give report-only view to my board members, so they could also get on and check reports at any time. Most accounting people that you talk to will tell you that QuickBooks Online is a joke and really slow and you shouldn't use it. And they would prefer more of the desktop version of it and then sending files back and forth as needed, or hosting on a server or something like that. Whatever system you use, start thinking about how you're going to do that. If you're going to hire a company, such as Charter School Management Services, CSMC, or that's Building Hope does some of that as well, and there's a lot of other companies that do that. You could start having those negotiations with them now in terms of what they would charge. Some will do it for free up through school starting. Some will charge you some like a monthly fee. Some will base it on per student. It kind of depends. It's all over the place. If you're going to be doing that kind of a situation where you're hiring somebody to do your accounting, I'd recommend doing it sooner rather than later so that you have that system in place before you start having a lot of expenses. If you're going to be handling it yourself and having somebody internally handle all of your finances, start researching those financial software packages to figure out what you want to use. As board members, I think it's important that you understand the basic structure of Red Book. Not detailed into the weeds of it, but when you look at a financial report, you should understand the difference between the fund, function, and object code. And if you don't know what those terms mean, I'd recommend you research a little bit more. Fund is basically fund is your general fund and your grant fund and your food service fund and an internal fund. Those are pretty much the only funds that most charter schools have. Then your function further breaks that down and says what the purpose of the fund money is that you're spending is. So you might have a 5,000s are generally instruction. So like 5,100 is general instruction, 5,200 is special ed. But as a board member, you should understand that 5,000 numbers mean instruction. 6,000 numbers mean instructional services. 7,000 numbers means general support like administration, facilities, things like that. And then within each function, it gets further broken down by object. So you would have 100s are for paying people, like employee salaries. 200s are for employee benefits. 300s are for services. 500s are for supplies. That's the level that I think boards should understand with Redbook and be able to get summaries from whatever accounting software you're using in terms of how much you're spending within those general categories. And that's how you're monitoring your budget. You need to compare your budget for those amounts to how much you've actually spent to those amounts to make sure you're on track. So this is just some example here. Like if you were purchasing classroom supplies, your fund would be 100 or 110, depending on how you have it set up. Your function would be 5,100 and your supplies would be 510. So whoever you hire to do this should know how to do this. Or if you're going to hire somebody internally to do your accounting, they need to understand a lot more detail about how those object codes break down and where things are supposed to go. In your binder, there is a summary of the Redbook codes that are most commonly applied to charter schools. That is binder tab number 11. That's something that we've written as part of the CSU. In binder tab number 12 is the actual Redbook. Probably in your charter application, you said you were going to use the Florida's, what's it called? Long term for Redbook. I don't remember what it is. But most people put it in there and don't even realize really what it is. But tab 12 in your binder is what it is. And it's really long and boring, but hopefully tab 11, the summary, will be enough for you. Unfortunately, with regards to startup costs, there's no reliable source of funding for you, which is bad news. Most of the schools that we work with that have financial backers that come in and kind of give grants to get the school up and running or a loan of some sort, those are the schools that we most often work with in terms of building hope side of things. Those schools that don't have any of those financial resources find it very, very difficult to get things up and running open because there's, you have these lawyers that we're talking about, and we have this lease stuff that we're talking about, and we have this marketing stuff that we're talking about, and all of that stuff is going to cost money. So if you don't have a financial backer, you can start looking for grants and things, but there's not very many out there that I can point you to, unfortunately. There is a CSP grant, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides. You can look at private funds. You can look at loans, but most people are not going to be willing to loan you money at this point because you have no operating background, no history, and you don't even have a charter contract, so how do we know you're really going to exist? There are some organizations like Charter Capital who specialize in funding for charter schools at the beginning. You can talk with them. Some banks, some people are able to negotiate well enough that they're able to get a loan. It's very, very uncommon. If you do take out loans, the important thing is to make sure you have the documentation in place before you do it. There was a school right now, it's been in the news recently in Palm Beach County, where the founder loaned money to the school to get it up and running, but then the board didn't realize it was a loan, and now he wants to be paid back, and there's this back and forth because there was not adequate documentation at the beginning. So every dollar that comes into your school, my recommendation is you have some form of documentation about what that's for. And if it is a loan that needs to be paid back, make sure you have terms in writing that your board has agreed to. Otherwise, you could end up in problems later on. So the CSP grant, I'm not an expert in this. I don't work for the grants office, but I'll give you what I know. The RFP came out about a week and a half ago, and it's due on December 21st. So if you are opening a school next August, you need to get your application in by December 21st. The application process for this is you take your 150-page charter application and you try to whittle it down into 20 pages and answer the questions that they have, and that's your grant application. It's a lot of copying and pasting and whittling down from your application. The review process is done by humans. And the reason I say that is because we have submitted identical grant applications for schools that are opening in different counties, and one will score 80 and another will score 70. And it's all based on the subjective opinions of the humans who are evaluating it.
Yeah, no, we had one was the second highest score, and then one of them didn't make it.
Yeah.
Welcome to the life
Yes.
of grant writing.
Identical.
So what they do, and I didn't check the RFP if it's the same, is I think they have 5 people who read each application. Each of those 5 people give it a score, and then they drop the highest and the lowest, and then they average the 3 remaining, and that's your score. So it is a very subjective process, unfortunately. In the past, it has been extremely competitive. 2 years ago, there was about 160 schools who had applied, and I think only 40 or 50 got accepted. Last year, it was not competitive. Every school that applied except for 2 received the grant, and the 2 that didn't get it was because they didn't score high enough. They didn't meet the minimum score. So we have no idea.
You want to answer?
My opinion is the reason it was less competitive last year is because there are less charter applications that are getting approved.
Do you know where?
Yeah, no, the number of charter applications approved is way down.
This year?
Yeah,
So
overall.
the chances are better.
Yes.
Chances are better than it was a couple of years ago.
I don't know how many grants they're giving out though. This year we were not supposed to have a CSP competition, but they had enough money left over from the previous years that they took all the money that was left over from the previous years and they're doing another competition. Yes. So my guess, no, they don't usually tell you until later. In the past, it's been like between 350 and 375, and that's over 3 years.
Ask them how,
I've looked at, in my research, I haven't called them.
probably in the RFP.
It's not in the RFP. It says it depends on the number that they award.
Oh, well, sometimes they put little caveats in there. I have one comment. I reviewed these several times. And I think part of the disadvantage is putting in identical applications. Because they ask, what are the needs of the students that you're going to serve and how are you going to specifically help those students? And when you put in generic applications, it's real evident. You know, you have an application that could apply to Omaha, Nebraska, or to Jacksonville, Florida, and it doesn't come across as understanding the needs of your particular client. So I think that's something that companies tend to do that counts against them. It's a lot more work to try to personalize it.
I have a very quick question. Is there anywhere that the old applications, like you can find old?
You could do a records request to the grants office and they'll give them to you. And also ask for the comments from the reviewers, and then you can review the comments that the reviewers put in. So the process is by December 21st, you have to do the narrative responses. There's no budget. You don't need to say how you're going to spend the money. You need to do the narrative responses about your school. Then they'll review those, and usually about 2 or 3 months, they'll let you know whether or not you make it to stage 2. If you make it to stage 2, that's when you have to put in a budget, and that's when you have to get physical signatures in blue ink, and they do require blue ink.
In the right line.
On the right line. One thing you will know, sorry, Chris, but one thing that you will notice is the grant office is extremely picky about every single little piece of paper that they need. So when they put a rule in their RFP, follow it to the letter because they are very strict about their rules. And part of it is because it's a federal grant and the federal grant is really picky too. So usually it's a couple months after the initial narrative responses, you do stage 2. If you get to stage 2, you're not guaranteed funding, but I don't know of any school that's made it to stage 2 that hasn't been funded. But they'll tell you it's not guaranteed, just FYI. So if you get to stage 2, as long as you follow the rules and get all the papers in that you need to get in, you can feel pretty well assured that you're probably going to get funded, but the state will not say you're guaranteed to get funded. Then they will finish their process, and then they're going to start asking you for lots of documents. And I recommend that you start getting those documents in along at the same time as your stage 2 application. Those are things like your bylaws, your lease, your contract. You need to have a policy on procurement about how you're going to order and buy things. You need to have an enrollment policy with your lottery deadlines. You need to have your conflict policy, which you had for your 501c3 application. You need to have your inventory policy because you need to inventory everything that comes in as CSP money. And you need to have all of your board member training done before you can get implementation 1 money. If you're going into a planning year, then you can not have some of those documents are not required to move into the planning phase. But if you're opening in August 2016, you're probably going to want to open into implementation 1. So the way they do it is they break it into 3 parts. You have your planning part, which is usually about $25,000. Then you have your implementation one part, which is usually about $175,000, and that covers year one of your school. And then they have whatever's left as part of implementation two, which is usually the second year of your school. So you can skip that planning and move right into that big chunk if you're opening next year. And if you're going to open in August of 2016, that's what I recommend doing. The process. No, you still get the money. You get it during year two, I think, as opposed to the planning time. But you can, if you get all the paperwork in, you can start implementation one in like April or May and start getting those funds. There are pros and cons to that, and they'll do webinars which will explain the pros and cons of both ways, and then you can decide for yourself which is best. I'm trying to be politically correct here. The process for getting the budgets approved and moving through the implementation process is arduous and takes a really long time. And they're starting to get more strict because the feds are getting more strict on them about not approving any purchases before the budget was approved. So it used to be in the past where you could kind of slide by if you submit your application and your budget and you purchase something within the time frame, but it was after, like you purchased it in July, but your budget wasn't approved till August. If your original grant application was dated back in April or May, they usually let it slide, but they're not going to do that anymore. So you need to submit your budget needs to be approved, and all of the receipts need to be dated after the state has approved the grant, the budget. So it's really important, as soon as you hear anything from that office, that you get all of the paperwork in as quickly as possible. Because those startup funds, you need to start spending money on July 1 to buy your textbooks and to buy your furniture and all that kind of stuff. And that process for getting the budget approved is really, really slow. So as soon as you have the opportunity to start handing stuff in, hand it in right away. You look confused.
No, I'm not confused.
Okay.
It's just that seems unfair, but I understand what you're saying.
This is true of all grants.
Yeah, because we have to get everything done, and we need money to do it. But I'm not confused.
You know, years ago, they actually would cut you the check.
Right.
And then you did a reimbursement, which actually worked as a startup grant.
Right.
Now we call it the start after grant.
Start. So we need to get teachers traveling just so much.
Yeah. The other thing that's really important to remember about the grant is that the district is the fiscal agent. So in addition to all of the requirements that the state puts on you, the district can put as many arbitrary restraints on you as they want in addition to what the state does. So there are some districts which are really easy to work with and it flies through and it's a piece of cake. And there are some districts where one school I was working at, it took me about 8 months to get the district to approve the budget.
They don't like you, do they?
They do not like me. So if you're from that county and you ask me for help, I will tell you, you don't want to ask me for help. So that's the CSP grant. Any questions on that? All right, so this is my last slide, I think. I mentioned that we're going to be meeting periodically throughout the year. So those of you who are from consulting groups, you're welcome to join us. And I don't know if you'll want to or not, if you find this information beneficial. But for those of you who are actually starting schools, I hope that you'll consider joining us. Polk, Brevard, are you actually starting schools? Miami-Dade. Okay, so we need to pick a location.
We'll be there.
Orlando is actually pretty central for everybody, for who's on the team then.
I can host you in Lakeland.
Would Lakeland be okay? Could we use your
have a big
district
training
office?
center that's right off the Polk Parkway, which is right off the interstate.
Would that work?
Yes.
Lakeland is probably about another half hour west.
I will get there wherever you say.
Okay. I'll talk with you. And then, so I'm thinking probably like middle to end of January to meet again.
Okay.
And then the topics that are listed there are what I'm thinking we're going to cover. And then we'll meet again in March, and then we'll meet in May for the state training, but not part of this. And then in July again, that's going to be like, oh my God, my hair's gone because I've been pulling it out. And we can talk about last minute stuff for opening up.
Will it be longer than this one?
Yes.
I'm not complaining. I appreciate what you've done, but this is a lot in one.
Yeah, I would rather make it more interactive, and I even bought post-it charts, but I knew we wouldn't have time, so I didn't get to them.
So
But
a
yeah,
full day.
my plan is to do full days. Yeah.
But he also works on a grant and works for us, part-time to continue to help you if you need help. And I would put you in touch with him if you contact me. I can help you reach him. But he's been working, doing these kinds of seminars and assistance services for others for like 5 years that I've been around, maybe even longer than that.
So my business cards are here too. If you didn't get one, steal one.
Again, it was like one of the meetings that you had in Miami and
That's usually where they have the trainings in May. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. So just let me know if you support. I have you all signed up in Fang. When Richard was talking, I signed you all up in there. So you probably have an email from that system with your username, and it asks you to click on a link to verify to set up a password. If you didn't get that, let me know and I can reset it for you. Check your spam box because it might have gone into spam. And then feel free to call me if you need any assistance with getting things started before we meet again. And I'll be in touch with you in terms of when we'll meet next.
Leave your evaluations at your seat. And let's give it up for Richard.
12:01, pretty good time.
Good.
We have some special